Yo, Source Gang in the building, Seven Gang in the building. Y'all know how we rocking, man. We back on the scholarship. We back on it. We've been saying this for a while. You know what I'm saying? I've been saying I coined the slogan, I coined the phrase. Ain't here, bait. It's a stick up. And I wanted to do this video for some time because we have a misunderstanding on how biological genetics work, population genetics work, and what makes people related to each other. We have a misunderstanding of how those things work, what we have been taught, and what has been conceptualized here in America and other places as well, that if you look or share the same skin tone or share some features, then that makes you related. And that's not true at all. That's further from the case. Another misconception is the idea that we all come from, if we're classified as Black or classified as African, that means that we are all connected biologically, and that's not true as well. And that comes from the misconception known as race. This race that has been taught for eons, that has been taught wrongfully and pushed on our people, even on our job applications, is not correct. It's not a scientific thing. Scientifically, it doesn't stand to scrutiny. It does not withstand scrutiny through the empirical data. So today what we're going to deal with is unraveling those misconceptions. What's going on, Judah? Unraveling those misconceptions about race, African, what makes you Black, and all these things. Just because you share a certain phenotypes with other people doesn't mean that you guys share the same lineage, nor does it mean you're biologically connected or you share the same pedigree. Let James in the building. What's going on, James?
Hey, Shalom, Mike. I'm driving right now. I'm gonna join in more when it shut down. I just seen what was going on. Jeremiah told me he wanted to talk about this topic, so I just hopped on.
Yeah. I'm gonna deal with some literature today. Break down the genetics of African populations, because the misconception is that everybody that's an African or labeled as an African is the same. I mean, it applies to any other group, but I want to focus on African. So what will happen is, it will say if someone has woolly hair or coarse hair, very thick coarse hair, some will say nappy, right? Dark skin, then they are considered to be of the African race, and they are all connected genetically. But when we look at the empirical data and we look at the science behind that, it doesn't stand up to empirical scrutiny. So that's what we're dealing with today. That's why I made this video.
Let me ask you a quick question. Did you notice anything special about the Fulani people in Nigeria in your studies? Just a question before I say anything about it.
The Fulani people some of them have European haplogroup.
Exactly.
Some of them.
Yeah. If you're going to talk about it, I'm going to go ahead and let you talk about it. That's why I just asked, because I was going to share it. But if you got something put together for it, don't do your thing.
Yeah. So the Fulani people, some of them look what we call Negroid, but they have European haplogroups, meaning they descend from a European male line. You also have the Chadic people. They look Negroid, but they don't share the same fathers as other Africans do. They share fathers that come from the European gene pool. And this is why you cannot judge people solely on how they look. Some people of the limba come from haplogroup J, and they look Africoid. They look what you would call African. You'll say, oh, well, they're African. How can they be from haplogroup J? It's because genetics doesn't work on the surface level. It doesn't work like that. But we have been taught here in this country to be over visual, surface level thinking. You understand? And this is what's being repeated in school and really needs to be eliminated. This is antiquated thinking that comes from the 19th century. That, okay, the black race, the white race, the yellow race, the red race. And that's not how nations work. That's not how pedigree works. You are who your father is on your according to your Y chromosome. That passes down and determine what male line that you come from. Now, the Bible deals with what male line you come from. Jacob had children. They were the Israelites, and they determined who they were according to the male or paternal line. For instance, Issachar made Issacharites. You understand? Judah made Judites. Benjamin made Benjamites. So on and so forth. Ishmael had Ishmaelites. And just because they share the same paternal line, same male ancestor, does not mean they're going to automatically look the same. You understand? So that's why we're doing this, man. I'm trying to erode these misconceptions that have been perpetuated in the school system and taken up by different Israelite sects. Because some Israelite sects, well, you have to look Negro to be an Israelite, which doesn't make any sense biologically or genetically. And even on the opposite side, when black people, or people of color, say that they're Jews, the first thing that the opposition says, well, you don't look like a Jew. You're not white. That doesn't make any sense genetically. Because it doesn't matter if someone looks like white or what we call quote unquote black. It matters if their genes and the pedigree lines up. Where does that pedigree fall? Where is the most recent common ancestor, as they say in genetics? Who are their most recent common ancestors? Where are they from? Who are they? That's how you determine who is a Jew, not by the color of their damn skin, man. All right. So we're going to get into Dr. Muntaser, which is a geneticist, his work. And I think he did a great job in unraveling and dispelling a lot of the myths dealing with race. You understand? So I'm going to share my screen. Hey, shalom to Haya, be praised. And we're going to get into this brother's work because he did a great, fantastic job. It's a geneticist from the Sudan, actually. So a Sudanese geneticist, and he wrote a book. The book is entitled The Genetics of African Population in Health and Disease by Muntaser E. Ibrahim and Charles N. Rotimi. All right, so we're going to read the introduction. And there's only 2 chapters in this book that I want to bring out today because it deals with the topic about the misconception of the African race, our understanding of it. People that look the same are not necessarily the same. I have quoted from this book before. All right, so it says the genetics of African population and health and disease, the birthplace of modern humans. Africa has the highest genetic diversity in the world, yet it remains vastly understudied. Let me stop there and just make a notation on that. If Africa is the highest genetic diversity in the world, how can all of the inhabitants be the same? How can everybody in Africa be the same if Africa has the highest genetic diversity? If it's genetically diverse, what does diverse mean? Different. That means they're not all the same. So again, for those that are studied, you should understand this. So again, Africa has the highest genetic diversity in the world, yet it remains vastly understudied, with biomedical research increasingly focused on human variation. Studying the large population size and number of mutations in African genomes could unravel the complexity of phenotypic traits underlying the biology of our species and hold huge potential for scientific and medical advances. So wait a minute. There's a complexity of phenotypic traits, and they learning that through the study of African genomes. Why? Because they're diverse. Not every African is the same. There's a lot of diversity in the African gene pool. It's not like in Europe. Europe, a lot of its population is due to inbreeding, so they don't have that much diversity. Majority of, I think, like 60% of Western Europeans is from haplogroup R. So majority of them, they have the same genetic information. Majority of them, it's not the same in Africa. So let me keep reading. So the initial chapter, conceptualizing Africa, providing relevant terminology. The first part of the book covers genetic history and population structure, and that's what we're going to deal with. The next part looks at the genetic basis of the common infectious disease, such as leash, meningitis, malaria, tuberculosis, with a final part considering common non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, obesity, heart disease, and cancer. So we won't be dealing with that part, but we will be dealing with the genetic history and population structure because that is important to the topic. A lot of our people believe that if you're African, you're the same, and we're going to debunk that today. If you're labeled African, does not mean you have the same pedigree or same lineage, or you are related biologically. Like the brother brought up with the Fula, many of them have European ancestry on their on the paternal side. So no, we're not the same as those individuals. Let's keep going. Gene, environment, interaction under globalization, and the burden of disease and lifestyle are included. This book is suitable for researchers and graduate students in biological anthropology, genetic anthropology, human and population genetics, and public health. Muntaser Ibrahim is a professor at the Department of Molecular Biology, Institute of Endemic Diseases at the University of Khartoum, Sudan. He established the Unit of Disease and Diversity at the university in 1998. He is a founding member of the African Society of Human Genetics. This is why I like using him. He's the founding member of the African Society of Human Genetics. So he's a great resource for dealing with topics like this one. Charles N. Rotimi is the chief of metabolic, cardiovascular, inflammatory disease genomics branch and the director of the Center for Research on Genomics and Global Health at the National Human Genome Research Institute, MDUSA. He was the founding president of the African Society of Human Genetics and spearheaded formation of the H3 African Initiative. So these two doctors are great resources and source material for dealing with any race-related topic dealing with Africans, because they pretty much eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff, man. All right, so now we're gonna go to the first chapter. Like I said, we're only going to deal with 2 chapters here. It's going to be relevant to the topic. We're going to deal with reflections on. My bad. Oh, let me deal with the prologue. It says Pliny the Elder said, to paraphrase, that there was always something new out of Africa. The place that was Africa for Pliny and the Romans was in super-Saharan and northern Saharan Africa, specifically a region that encompasses the current state of Tunisia, the location of ancient city of Carthage. By Pliny's time, Carthage and the surrounding territories were a colonized region, specifically a Roman and Romanized province called Africa. So I love bringing this information out because Africa was not always the entire, what we call the continent of Africa. It was just the northern strip that the Romans had seized around the Mediterranean Sea, right? That's what they call, and they placed that name Africa. Yes, it was based off the Afir tribe, but they named it Africa. That terminology is Roman. African is Roman. So a lot of you have mythicized the term and tried to make it seem like, well, we call ourselves African because our ancestors called themselves African, or it came from our ancestors. That is a lie. That came from the Romans creating that province and naming it Africa. That's where that word comes from. It says during the Islamic period, the name Africa passed into Arabic as Ifriqiya. And the same region was known by this name for a millennium until it began to be called Tunis. The Ottomans continued to use this name during French colonial occupation. This protectorate was called Tunisia, and the name was kept after independence. In many instances, Pliny's Africa has all but been forgotten in the conceptualization and naming of Africa. An irony of sorts, given that it was an Amazigh king from this region, Masinisa, who first said Africa for the Africans. In the heady days of the various interactions within and between the regions in Rome. And look, a lot of you pro-blacks, a lot of you people that's pushing Egypt and pushing Egyptology, you're not going to teach this history. You're not going to bring out this information because you guys are teaching that the word Africa is some kind of holy word from the Medu Neter. That's a bunch of pseudoscience and pseudo jargon. Here at the source, we actually bring forth source material and for the people's sake, so you can get a clean, clear distinction on what was going on in history and a clear distinction on the topic at hand. All right, so it says today Africa designates an entire continent, although sometimes its supra-Saharan and northern Saharan regions, ironically including Tunisia, are often forgotten to be in Africa in various kinds of studies and disciplines. Now, I want to say that too, because this goes on the topic here, and we're going to go back into the reading. Why, when someone mentions that you're African, they don't mention Tunisia, they don't mention Algiers, they don't mention anything north of the Sahara when they say African? They only think about sub-Saharan Africa. They only think about Nigeria, Ghana, the Gold Coast. They don't bring up Northern Africa. You know what I'm saying? So why are they not mentioning Northern Africa? Because that puts a hole in the dichotomy. You've created this false dichotomy that African means black and woolly haired. But when you go north in super-Saharan, there's a various and diverse look. You have different people there. They don't all look the same. So your argument based off phenotype falls to the wayside when we look at North Africa. What's going on, James?
I was just going to say, and it's been like that for thousands upon thousands of years. North Africa's almost always been multicultural. It's never been like just one culture permanently in North Africa or doing that. Not since at least 4,000 BCE. If not earlier, when you got the complex, the Ibero-Mauritian complex coming through there, and you get the Githan and the Tafarots coming through there and stuff, all that stuff there are multicultural. There were at least 3 different ethnicities coming through there, almost since, like I said, since early time.
Yeah, that's a fact. That's a fact. They've even admitted that haplogroup R came around that time. Then the shrinkage of the Green Sahara, and that's another topic. Don't let these people fool you that we were stuck in sub-Saharan Africa. I'm gonna touch on it a little bit. For millions of years or thousands of years, there was no long-standing civilization in sub-Saharan Africa before the shrinkage of the Green Sahara.
Unless you consider pygmies a civilization.
Yeah, they had little hunter-gatherer groups, small hunter-gatherer groups, but they didn't have any major standing civilizations in sub-Saharan Africa before that period. Me and Rob Bourne was talking about that. We read some literature, and I said, look, man, you're not going to show me this. You're not going to show that. We brought out the books, and I showed them in a particular book that there's no what's the word, archaeological vessels that can prove it, that you have people there. You don't see any dwellings. You don't see any forming. You don't see anything that will indicate civilization prior to the shrinkage of the Green Sahara.
Yeah, Africa is hunting and gathering a civilization. It's just not. I mean, it doesn't have farming. It doesn't have complex buildings or anything like that. You don't get that until, like you said, farming comes into the region, and that comes in when you haplogroups.
Exactly. Haplogroups, which is our ancestors came in and brought in farming, introduced agriculture, and brought in civilization. So they made the inroads forward. Before then, you had hunter-gatherer populations, which were primarily A and B haplogroups, which have nothing to do with majority of African Americans. It has nothing to do with majority of African Americans. And this is another reason we're doing this, because we lump all black people together, and all black people are not the same. All Africans are not the same. They're not. We have different pedigrees and we have different legacies. Our legacy brought in literature. Our legacy brought in language, period. That's what our legacy did. Our legacy brought in farming, agriculture, and modern civilization. That's what our legacy did. The A and B haplogroups, the Khoikhoi, and what we call the Sun people, they wasn't involved in that, man. They were hunter-gatherer groups primarily. And many of them are still hunter-gatherer groups today.
I was just about to say that. They still practice their ancient traditions to this day. Look at the Khoisan people in the South. They used to be in Northeast Africa. Then they migrated down to the South, practicing the same exact traditions they were practicing in ancient times. Just like haplogroups are in West Africa right now doing farming and agriculture. It's been their way of life forever. And we got to understand that when you live a certain way for thousands of years, it becomes part of your genetic code. There's certain things that you're going to like that other people aren't going to like. There's certain ways you're going to move that other people aren't going to move. That's why, like me, I've always been able to notice, like, whoa, look, there's something different about this long, skinny, lanky African, super black African. He even moved differently than the way we typically move. Why? Because they came up differently over the thousands of years we've been here on the planet. They've, quote unquote, evolved differently. You know what I'm saying? So we got to notice these things because, again, sets up our philosophies on life and how we seek to live life.
Right, man. And that's why it's important we had this, because, again, you ain't going to get this information from no pro-black group. You ain't going to get it from Sarnetta. You're not going to get it from Dr. Umar Johnson. They just going to tell you African. We all the same. And no, we're not. We're going to draw that line of distinction. All right. So it says today Africa designates an entire continent, although sometimes its supra-Saharan and northern Saharan regions, ironically including Tunisia, are often forgotten to be in Africa in various kinds of studies and disciplines. Or it may be seen as Africa Minor, or in the case of Egypt, being called erroneously an isthmus. So again, these places are not even included by the so-called conscious community. They don't talk about these places. Real quick sidebar, Jabari we used to always mention the Tamahu. Well, where are the Tamahu from? They're from North Africa. They're from Libya. He will always bring up the Tamahu. You know what I'm saying? And the Tamahu are not depicted to look like other Africans, showing diversity in Africa, in Northern Africa. It says Africa is often equated with sub-Saharan, which is the equivalent of equating Asia only with Far Eastern Asia and ignoring Arabia, India, and the Central Steppe regions.
Which is what they do.
Yeah, they do. When they say Asian, they think of China. Yeah, China.
Yeah, they don't think of Middle East at all when they think of Asia. They don't even really think India.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy, man. I blame the liberal public school system. I blame the liberals.
Damn right. It's always their damn fault. You got them liberals, man, always messing something up. Wanting to change language and stuff to fit their ideology. So that they the same ones that was trying to make us migrant workers instead of descendants of slaves and stuff, so they won't have to, pay any restitution. They trying to find anything they can, man.
Facts. Big facts. So you can blame the Democratic Party for the poor education system, and it's done by design. But that's why you're here, because we're gonna educate you properly here on The Source. So it says, or equating Europe and Europeans only with Northern Europe as being the only authentic Europe. In both cases, excluding the rest of these regions, super-Saharan and Saharan are used to have symmetry with the often used sub-Saharan, with infra-Saharan being a better term because it's free of ideological baggage related to the colonial enterprise. And that's key. That's key. These terms that we're using to divide and slice up Africa is ideological baggage from the colonial enterprise, because they were trying to establish what? That Africans were made to be slaves based on the curse of Ham. We covered this before, and based on their skin color, the fact that they were black, they were supposed to be, they were all from an inferior race, and they were made to serve. Because before that period, the slave would have to have branding. You would have to brand a slave, put a bore on the slave. But now you can just say, well, slaves do have branding, their skin color. So that ideological baggage comes from that colonial enterprise through the period of colonization. That's where that ideological baggage comes from. And Dr. Muntaser is trying to move away from that terminology.
Yeah, but you have communities like, unfortunately, the ones that call them the conscious community, that they hold on to this ideological baggage like a religion, man. It's crazy to me.
Right. They'll tell you, oh, you can't be a Jew because you got to be this black African, which encompasses everything. And I'm like, yo, and then they'll tell you, well, you got that notion from the white man, but we're reading right now that you're getting this notion from the colonial enterprise. You're getting
just like the same notion. Brother, we've been in Africa for thousands of years, just chilling. Yeah, while they out there building civilization, building great empires, they want you to believe you was just sitting in Africa doing nothing, playing in the bushes and stuff like a pygmy. Bro, stop it, man. That's ideological baggage you grew up with, watching it on TV when you was a little kid, all them shows about African booty scratchers and stuff like that, and you don't want nothing to do with it.
Exactly.
So you act like, man.
Exactly. When we have a far greater history than that, we played a huge and pivotal roles in the development of humanity, period, and where we are today.
Every pivotal role, from the founding of agriculture to the founding of cities, to the spreading of agriculture, to the spreading of civilization, writing, etc. All that comes from us. But they got y'all out there believing y'all was just sitting in Africa doing nothing, playing in the bushes, swinging from trees and stuff until the white man came and civilized you.
Yep. A white man actually said, he said, without the African, the world will be, unchanged. It'll be pretty much the same. Little do he know, man. You know what I'm saying? Little do he know. Would be no right.
Yeah, they would be in Europe. My bad. Like they'd be in Europe still hunting and gathering if it wasn't an E-haplo group coming through there and giving them farming.
That's a fact. I mean, just now recently, 1,000 years ago, you had the Moors coming in, which primarily was haplogroup E. They came in and brought in astronomy, brought in chemistry, many of the advances in science that we use today. So it's like, stop. Algebra. So we can go on about that. We continue reading. It says other descriptive terms have no equivalent analogs. For example, South Africa is not the counterpart of North Africa, and East Africa and West Africa are not equivalents. There is also the designation of Black Africa, often used as a synonym for Sub-Saharan, which is problematic and has no parallels with other continents. I want the conscious community, I want Sinetta, I want everybody from that side to read this portion, because you need to understand this. I'm going to read it again. There's also the designation Black Africa, often used as a synonym for Sub-Saharan, which is problematic and has no parallels with other continents. Tropical Africa, as another term, is interesting in this regard because it includes a part of Egypt and parts of the Sahara Desert of multiple Maghrebian states, and renders the notion of tropical as a denotation only for forested regions as wrong. Tropical Africa lies between the two tropics and offers the possibility of terms like infratropical and supertropical. It is possible to construct various divisions of interest based on various criteria and relevance to particular studies. There is no one way to be African. No claim is made that Africans are uniform or homogeneous across space and time. It follows that there are and have been many African diasporas generated by voluntary and involuntary migration. There's also internal African diasporas. So what is Muntaser pointing out here? He's pointing out that it's very erroneous to call this place Black Africa with the known history that there's been many diasporas, and the stretch of land doesn't even include what we call sub-Saharan Africa. It stretches all the way to Egypt between the two tropics, like he brought out. So just like he pointed out in his book, there is not one way to be African, which many people have been taught. The one way to be African is have black skin, woolly hair, and be in sub-Saharan Africa, which is very erroneous. And the people that are regurgitating this are not studied in population genetics. It's clear. All right. Ahaya Praise says haplogroup E was also discovered to be the founding haplogroup of the Afro-Asiatic languages and culture. Correct, brother. We had covered that in videos prior. All Shemitic languages and cultures came from haplogroup E1B1. That is also correct. And I don't know why the conscious community is afraid to accept this history, accept that our legacy is a part of this. You want to put other groups in that have nothing to do with us. This is our legacy.
You know why they're afraid of that, bro? I'm going to tell you. Because it connects us back to them Asiatics that they love to talk down on and talk bad about. Because we know that E haplogroup is an Asiatic haplogroup. And they don't want to recognize that. So they only want to notice our history since we've been in Africa. Or they want to adopt the indigenous African histories as their own and act like they've been there forever.
Right. Right. Polite said something to the effect that we were the first something in Africa. And I'm like, you will realize that you talking about a different group that really don't got nothing to do with us. You are speaking on archaic Africans. Like if you get a DNA test and your ancestry estimate comes back, you'll see 5% archaic African. A lot of people will say, what the hell is an archaic African? The archaic Africans are those that belong, are the first ones, or the ones we put there first, that came first, right? Those are the A and B haplogroups, the Khoi and the San people. The brother also said, how could we have been swinging from trees when E1B1A brought metallurgy, pastoralism, construction house buildings, and agronomy to Africa during the Bantu migration? Exactly, bro. Exactly. We wasn't these simple-minded people eating maggots from rocks, man. We wasn't doing that. We wasn't no pro-magnus, man. What's the other archaic human? We wasn't them. We was these people that brought all of these inventions and these played pivotal roles in the history of mankind. Like the brother brought out metallurgy, pastoralism. The first ones that had permanent dwellings were us.
Exactly.
Come on, man.
Well, people don't study. You know what I'm saying? They just go with what's been said by they, master teachers. And the thing I always said is I don't knock Dr. Ben, John Henry Clark, and all them for coming to the conclusions they came to with the scholarship they had of that day. But my nigga, this 2020, man. Stop using early 1900s scholarship, man. A lot of that stuff is irrelevant now. A lot of that stuff couldn't stand up to scrutiny. All right. We have so many archaeological advances in the Near East. A lot of that stuff about all these religions coming from Egypt don't make no damn sense.
Right. What was the oldest place of worship? I forgot the name.
Inki Minyaki. Ikeminaki is the oldest one, which is the actual structure I can think of. And that's in the Near East, is in what we would call Iraq today. No, you talking about
Gobekli, yeah, there it is.
Gobekli Tepe. That's what
Yeah,
you talking about.
Gobekli Tepe, yeah.
I had to think about it for a minute. I'm like, hell no, we got Gobekli Tepe.
Yeah, all of these things, man, are coming from a different area. And our thing is, it really ain't the area, it's the people behind it, but they make it more area specific.
Because they committed to that landmass. They have taught you that landmass is all you've ever been and all you will ever be. You know what I'm saying? They don't want to let you know that the reason that landmass is so full of rich minerals and stuff like that is because ain't nobody been there to mess with it.
Right.
People just got there to start messing with it. They was already doing all that in the Near East. Now you see it turned into a desert. Took all the mineral resources from the land. So now all those people that was in the Near East, guess what they did? They migrated. You can call it back into Africa, even though we weren't Homo sapiens when we left. You can call it whatever you want, but they went into the interior of Africa due to all the wars and stuff that was going on in the Middle East, the climatic changes and stuff that was going on in the Middle East. They fled back into the mineral-rich soil where they could farm and live their lifestyles like they wanted to before the quote-unquote Gudians and other type more European haplogroup having people that was in the Near East start causing a whole bunch of wars and stuff.
Right. Very, very valuable and pertinent information that not being discussed because they want to talk about silly ass topics like if the Bible's good or evil or not. I saw that debate topic the other day. I'm like, man, what else? Y'all running out of ideas, man. You're running out of ideas.
And it's stupid because it's a question based purely on perspective. If you don't agree with what the Bible says is evil to you, if you agree with it, it's good to you. Like, I mean, what are you really arguing at the end of the day? It ain't nothing about truth. It's about who can sound the best. Them arguments don't mean nothing, man.
Yeah, based on there's no objective standard in a lot of these debates. There's nothing we can clearly say, okay, the guy won or lost based off this material. Because a lot of it's just, like you said, it's either opinionated, subjective, or how somebody feels, bro. That's not academia. Or that should not be what academia is based on. Let me put it like that.
Which is why a lot of people don't want to come and debate on that source platform. Why? Because we have standards, man. We ain't out here just playing around, man. It's about what is the truth around here or what is most reasonable, not whose opinion sounds the best. We use logic, reasoning, and evidence to come to our conclusions. Y'all using emotions like women.
Right. And you know what it is? We try to make a approximation of the truth. You understand?
That's all you can do.
Yeah, we don't own no time machines, nothing like that. We can't see into the past, but what we can do, like you said, is make our faith, make our talking points based off evidence, where we can show you where we're getting this from. Like today, we dealing with Muntaser's book. You can see the source. You can see that we're not pulling this out of thin air. You know what I'm saying? All right, so let's get back to the book. It says that the forgetting of Africa's northern regions as Africa, although not as common in some scholarship as it once was, has something to do with a set of notions born in an era of European-sponsored human trafficking and enforced settler colonialism. So when you Negroes on side of the TV from the conscious community or what have you, when you push that rhetoric, you're pushing the rhetoric of the colonizer. But you want to tell us that we following the white man. No, you are. And watch this. It gets even deeper. These include ideas about race and origins. Notions of isolated populations. That's what the brother just was bringing out. Y'all teach that we were stuck in Africa for thousands of years until the white man came and colonized it.
See how the Most High work? I ain't even read this yet. I'm hearing the first time from you.
Come on, man. This is what you guys are doing. Look, here it is. Beliefs about static ethnicities. When we tell them we're Israelites, no, you can't be Israelite. Y'all don't got nothing to do with that land and them people because, y'all was in Africa. That's called a static ethnicity, meaning we did not do any migration. We didn't even do any trade. We were stuck in one part of the world, Raborn.
Sound like they saying we were dumbasses.
We were dumb. Yeah, we couldn't figure out maritime, nothing. We didn't develop no kind of
Even
technology.
though we gave them it all. They gonna tell us, nah, you ain't do nothing. I guess the Bible is right, you know what I'm saying? The last shall be first and the first shall be last, but that's gonna flip, right?
Right.
That's all we waiting on for it to flip.
That's it. Check this out, James. It gets worse. It gets worse. It says beliefs about static ethnicities and unchanging peoples, typological thinking, racism, the sociology of knowledge, and nothing to do with geography and interconnected human beings as subjects with value and agency. So all of these things that were just listed out, the racism, the unchanging people, because they act like, and this go to the Israelite community too, you act like people were supposed to remain the same for thousands of years. That's not how genetics work. It's not how morphology works.
That ain't even how humanity works. Humans migrate. That's what we do.
Come on, man.
Even hunters and gatherers migrate across large regions to follow the animals that they hunt. Farmers do the same thing. They migrate and find new farming land to farm on. New places for their cattle to graze, which was the major reason most pastoralists fled back in Africa for a place for their cattle to graze because the Near East was becoming a desert. It used to be a tropical rainforest, but humanity turned it into a desert.
Right. And we got evidence of that because the humpback cattle that you brought up before. We can see the humpback cattle. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they go straight to Israel. I believe it's, if I got my memory correct, is the T1 haplogroup for cattle, the Zebu cattle. And that came from Israel. But guess where it came from Israel from originally? India. It came from India into Sumer into Israel. That's the same path that is argued that the founders of they were originally from the Harappan dynasty in India. A catastrophic, I believe it was an earthquake happened that diverted a river. And then they came down into the Sumerian Valley, founded Eridu and And then we know the story of Abraham. He came from of the Chaldees into Israel, what we call Israel today. And guess what they brought with them? They cattle. And it's showing the migration pattern of the cattle going there and from Israel into Africa as the most dominant pastoralist cattle in Africa. On the male haplogroup side, most of them descend from that haplogroup. That right there points back to Israel for us. But they don't want to acknowledge that. They don't want to do that type of studying because in an earlier presentation I did maybe a few years ago, I talked about how you can follow human migration patterns by studying the animals that they keep up with. Like if they're grazing cattle, you can study the cattle. And by the cattle migration pattern, you know the migration pattern of the humans that herd that cattle. It's basic, bro.
Yeah, man. Yeah, powerful points, man. Those are domesticated cattle. So, you need men there to domesticate them. It's just that simple.
Exactly.
All right, so let's keep reading. It says, this is what all comes with that colonial baggage that we brought up earlier in designating Africa as Black Africa and slicing up into parts and, truncating North Africa, not including North Africa. This all came from colonialism, and many of these people that call themselves conscious or woke are regurgitating the same thing. Watch this. It says, it is also related to the creation of rank social identities inscribed onto biology based on racial schema. What did we bring out earlier? That the whole point of designating us as Black Africans was to show the world that we were branded to be slaves. We were bred to be slaves. You understand? And it put us on this racial schema where we're on the bottom based on our skin color. This is what we're regurgitating and teaching to our children and passing it on to the community. We have to deconstruct this and combat it. You understand? Because this has been taught for hundreds of years and being reverberated by other black people, by people calling it subconscious.
It's crazy because now if they read the modern, up to date scholarship like what you're doing now, you would know that even Europeans are throwing away these notions and being like, hold up, we got to relook at Africa altogether. Everything we've been saying about it has been wrong. We looking at the migration patterns. Hold up, man. These E haplogroups wasn't even in West Africa. We found them in East Africa in early times. We found them in the Near East, but we ain't finding them in West Africa. And I got a source. I'll probably bring it up when you're done, where it talks about the first race war in history. And it deals with what they call the ancestors of the Black Africans, which would be the people in sub-Saharan Africa, us E haplogroups. And them people migrated to that region from the Near East. They weren't originally in East Africa. They were in the Near East first. Migrated down there to Gabel Sahaba. So, I mean, in their scholarship, they're showing that we come from that region. But we have people, you know, that's still looking at, you know, they 60s masters teachers still reading, you know, books that was published in the 70s, you know, regurgitating white supremacy doctrines, because that's what these master teachers you had to learn at these universities, because that's how they was giving it to the people in the white supremacy terms.
Facts. Colonial baggage. Whenever you're ready to pull it up, just let me know.
I'll do it when you're done.
Okay, all right. So it says, this perspective crystallized during the antebellum and official colonial periods and often continues to influence various kinds of scholarship in political and social policy in some countries. The observation that Africa in practice is often restricted to its tropical regions have led to the question, where in Africa does Africa start? As noted, what is tropical by the map may not be the same as preconceived concepts associated with the term. The issue of what is African and what is not becomes interesting in discussions of human, biological, cultural, and linguistic origins and diversity, and would influence the collection and interpretation of data, including genetic data. As noted, the issue of African and descendants identity exists in some political, administrative, and social identity contexts, as in the U.S. Census, or even requirements for certain research, where some policies define super-Saharan and some Northern Saharan Africans out of Africa in grand racialist tradition. These identity issues will not be discussed here in any depth, but they cannot be avoided because they influence how science is done in terms of sampling and interpretation. There is a larger set of philosophical issues about the notion of any of the continental communal identities. When do they start? What is to be their basis? What must their time depth be? Are there notions of ancestral purity embedded on certain perspectives? And who gets to decide these questions? Populations are known to have changed religion and or language and acquired ancestry from other groups. Let me stop right there. Because Rabon would always say, well, if these people are Jews, why we don't see the Jewish faith? We should see the religion. These people are of the Akan. You know, he'll bring up all these different African religions and say, since he sees populations in today's time or modern era practicing a tradition that he would say is not Judaism, then therefore they can't be Jews. Which that doesn't make any sense. People can change religions, people can change language, change traditions, like Muntaser put it, acquire ancestry from other groups. So when you're intermingling with other people, you're going to pick up their traits. Most
of the world is Muslim. Does that mean they don't have ancient traditions other than Muslim?
Come on.
Large part of them Buddhist. Does that mean, you know what I'm saying? Like it's black people running around Buddhist. Does that mean they didn't have some indigenous African or Near Eastern tradition they descend from? It just don't make any sense. Like you can't classify people by what quote unquote religion they practice, or what cultural adaptation or adoption they have made. Like, that don't even make sense. When we talking about their ancient traditions, if you're talking about more modern traditions, maybe, but we talking about going back in time, nah, that don't make any sense, bro. A lot of you Negroes Christians right now, even though you argue you not Christian, you Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, you doing all that with your family.
Right.
You a Christian, right?
Right.
But you swear you follow, Mayat. You know what I'm saying? But everything you know is Christian in origin.
Facts, man. So I just had to bring that argument to the people, James, because he will always try to use that as an argument. And I'm like, yo, it's not an argument, bro. Like we always tell them, people change, acculturation happens. And wait, watch this. It says sometimes identities have changed in the process. And that's one of our core arguments. Mm-hmm. You understand? Because we went through a multitude of identities. Even in the Bible, it talks about them becoming Gentiles. You understand? Many of these people will be associated with the native people of the lands they were scattered. And that's even proven in archaeology, because many of those people that were banished, when the Northern Kingdom was banished in the 8th century BCE, many of them ended up in Assyrian society, fighting in the army for Assyria. We got the damn archaeology to prove it. So these people will become, just like the scripture says, a no people. These people will, which were not called our people, shall be called our people. I'm paraphrasing it, Hosea 1:10. So their identities change. We understand that happens not just with Israelites, it happens with various groups.
And make sure you quote it right. The extra religious folks, you know what I'm saying? They expect your quotes to be exact and precise. You're supposed to be a biblical encyclopedia. You know what I'm saying?
Well, Genesis 49 says that, or 48 says that Ephraim will become a multitude of nations. Mm-hmm. That's what it says. So again, over time, identities change. All right. So it says there's also the issue of the relationship of more specific bioethnic ancestry to social and or cultural identity at the moment in history. That's huge, because this is what they would do. We're talking about bioethnic ancestry. When we bring up haplogroup E, our connection to the Israelites, that's bioethnic ancestry. But what they will say is, well, nah, you ain't those people because of modern social and cultural identity at any moment in history. Well, you were considered African then. You consider African now. You consider Black then. You ain't got nothing to do with them people. That's how y'all argue, man.
But they say, a lot of Black men today, what they say, like a 4th grade reading level.
Yeah.
So, they comprehension skills, you know what I'm saying, and they deductive reasoning and critical thinking skills aren't well developed, brother. Gotta remember that.
Facts. And then, right here exemplifies it right here. It says, this is most easily illustrated by using recent populations. For example, having some Greek ancestry, being of Greek descent, does not mean that someone would be or is necessarily Greek identified. And we can plug in Israel. Having Israelite ancestry doesn't mean you're going to be Israelite identified in today. Why? Because the social and cultural identity of these people are not the same as it was 2,000-3,000 years ago. This should be common damn sense.
I thought it was. You know what I'm saying? You know what? I've learned to not view people by my own ability to reason. You know what I'm saying? Because some people just, they ain't there yet. You know what I'm saying? They just, I don't know, man. Maybe they dropped out of high school or something. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. But,
oh man.
Or maybe, I'm not gonna say that. I don't blame them. It's them damn Democrats' fault with this horrible damn education system. Because if we went to school choice, I have to say the Republican Party is promoting right now, school choice, our kids would have a far better education. Because you could put them in a Montessori school, Montessori schools are the schools them little rich white kids go to that teach them very, very well. But if you don't want to put your kid in a charter school, like I put my nephew in a Montessori charter school. Why? Because I want him to get the best education possible. Same education the rich white kids get, I'm getting for free. Why? Because I'm enacting my school choice. And I recommend that everybody else out there do the same thing. If you got young kids, take them out of regular school if your state allows and put them in a charter Montessori school. Only thing that's going to happen is the same money they would have paid that public school for your kid to go there, they're going to pay to this charter school, which is going to do 10 times better with that money. Period.
Yeah, that's a fact. And if you want to combat against poor education, you combat the Democratic Party, man. That's just simple. That's simple because they want to lock your kids into felon. I know this off topic, but they want to lock your kids into these felon schools and give them no alternatives. Come on, man. All right, I'm going to continue to read. It gets even better, man. It says, this would depend on social and political context and what gets emphasized or even known about ancestry. So when we have these arguments with people and they're like, well, no, why nobody identify you as a Jew? And why you don't look like the Jew and all these other things? That's based on social and political context of today's time. Of course, we're not going to get identified by the masses because that's not the social climate we live in. They've been taught that the real Jews are those people that came into the state of Israel in 1948.
Yeah, with them European haplogroups.
Right. And they all over the
European haplogroups.
Mm-hmm. Haplogroup R. You know what I'm saying? A lot of these people, you guys all over the place, man. You got E in there too, but y'all count J and R and all that other crap. And that's what y'all teach. It's not based off bioethnic ancestry with them. It's based off cultural and social identity.
Mm-hmm.
It says
the Bible is about your biological ancestry. It's promises made to biological descendants, not cultural adopters.
Yeah, G-Con. G-Con trying to give the promises away, man.
Yeah.
It continues on to say there are numerous other examples of this, as it is well known many, if not most, Latin Americans whose families date to the 19th century and before have some Native American and or African ancestry, but are not specifically part of communities that are labeled by state or self-identity as indigenous or Afro-identified. The non-European ancestries are dispersed in the general population, held in varying degrees by different individuals and families. I also want to touch on this for a moment because you got what we call Dominicans, and many of them have a lot of African ancestry. They have a lot of African ancestry. But what's ironic about that is socially and culturally, they do not identify with that. Many of them don't identify with it. I'm not black. I'm not African. I'm not this. I'm not that. And it would be more so akin to leaning on the European side. But many of them are like 60, 70% African. So again, it goes back to what's socially and culturally acceptable. If it's socially and culturally acceptable, then they're going to roll with it. It has nothing to do with that core biology. What we deal with is core biology on this channel, man. That's what we deal with. All right, let me get back to the page. I accidentally skipped it. Here it is right here. It says the non-European ancestries are dispersed in the general population, held in varying degrees by different individuals and families. Likewise, many people in the communities identified as Indian or African descendants have varying degrees of European ancestry, usually due to the actions of males during the conquest and enslavement periods. Many of those now identify sociopolitically as African Americans. Now, this is huge. In this case, meaning identified Afro-North Americans of Middle Passage descent or legacy African Americans have European ancestry, but are not socially identified as belonging to a European ethnic group. Why? It's because of their looks, how they look. But you do have African Americans that have a male paternal haplogroup that goes back to Europe.
R1B.
R1B.
Yep. A
You
lot of
do
us
have
have.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And they look like the rest of us. That's the
Wouldn't be able to tell no difference.
Exactly. That's the dangers of just lumping us all and not doing any bioethnic ancestry, man. It says, even if one parent is solely of European descent in the recent sense, there are groups that are known to have and may self-acknowledge multiple ancestry, such as the Melungeons. We speak on the Melungeons. Many of them are Sephardic Jews.
Exactly.
The Brass Ankles and the Nanticoke Moors. These examples from the New World can be taken to illustrate interactions that have taken place elsewhere in over a millennia. The connotated issues of classification have implications for science, medicine, and history. Ethno-ancestral identities do not project infinitely back in time. That is on point. So again, if you take this Black and African ancestry that we have today and try to go back 1,000, 2,000 years ago, eventually it's going to fall off the damn wagon, man.
I mean, the same thing applies for Europe. You got people in Yorkshire, Europe, that date back to the time when Septimius Severus was in the region, and they have E1B1A haplogroups, but look like a typical white person.
Facts.
It's a whole clan of them. Date all the way back to the time of Septimius Severus, 4th century BC. AD. All the way back to that time. But they look like a typical white person, just like we got people with white European paternal haplogroups that look just like typical Black folks, act like us, grew up around us, all that.
Right. That's a fact, man, and that's what we're trying to drill in y'all head today. It says this non-exhaustive essay with limited references addresses some issues related to evolution, the race concept, in social organization and conceptualization of African and Africans, in the nature and sources of African biological diversity against cultural and geographical backdrops. There is awareness here of the lack of significant participation of African scientists and philosophers in much of human biology and other research done in the human sciences on Africans. From paleontology to social anthropology to genetics, genomics, an effort will be made to present some different perspectives that could be brought to bear on existing data and new studies. No explicit evaluation of research programs such as the 1,000 Genome Project is undertaken here. The bias here is toward an evolutionary biogeographical perspective about African human biology informed by history and culture and the history of ideas. The very notion of population history becomes of interest in this regard. The concept of emergence of complex biocultural entities is taken as given in contrast to more traditional notions that imply units of purity. The perspective taken here is that the locale of biocultural history makes the subject of Africa, that any migration into Africa from outside at any time in which migrants have been largely assimilated has led to populations whose biology has been reworked by an African biocultural environment. Excluded are recent migrants from the colonial period or endogamous immigrant communities during the last 500 years. An accurate biogeography is needed, one based on a constant dialoguing with data and theory. Populations are processes and ensembles, assemblages not akin to monoliths consisting of uniform particles of a single element that emerge one time. And that's what we've been saying this whole damn time. Y'all think Africa is a monolith. Y'all think Africans are a monolith. They're all the same. They're not. All right. So it says, it is important to remember, all other things being equal, that over time a biological defined group could change cultural practices. Raborn. They could change cultural practices, Raborn, and or language, Raborn. Everything going back to Raborn. Raborn, they got to be speaking Hebrew. They got to be practicing Judaism by adopting new customs or languages, and that then a culturally defined group can change biology via intermarriage both only limited by social political milieu of the interactions. And also, that's how you get these many European groups into the Jewish faith. They either married in or they got taught these traditions in time. And very recent, before 1000 AD, actually. Many of these people
the modern European, I think they say it was around 4th century AD that they admixed with the sub-Saharan Africans, and I mean, like you said, it was a common denominator between all the diverse Jewish populations, which seems to be that they had mixed with a group of sub-Saharan Africans and picked up this cultural identity from this group, which to me says that the core group of Israel would be what we call today sub-Saharan African, what we've been arguing since before we ever seen this evidence, just based on what the scriptures showed us.
Right. Yeah, man. You know what's funny about these European Jews is it's recorded in history and documented when they converted.
Exactly.
It's recorded. But they want to say we the converts. Stop it.
We trying to steal their culture, huh?
Yeah. All right. It says there are many variations of this interplay of culture, ancestry, and identity, which has implications for studies. The philosophy of science has something to offer here as well. How populations are delimited is often a product of tradition or subjective parameters and not mind-independent entities. This has relevance to a range of studies. All right, so we go to the next section, Blackness and the notion of Africa. The stereotypical notion of African in recent times in phenotypically typical terms is usually linked to the trait of dark skin color, specifically that of being black, maybe beginning at dark brown. In fact, Black African, the problematic common phrase of use, is often, if not always, made synonymous with African in certain literature. Black and African are often incorrectly used interchangeably. When African having a particular cultural content thought of as being indigenous and in connection to a conception that make those so identified part of an entity that was conceived to be isolated from the rest of the world. And this is what you conscious community people do all the time. These people that are black, they're isolated from the rest of the world. We're stuck in Africa. We brought this up many times. They keep saying that we were stuck in Africa. We were a static ethnic group and nothing changed until the colonial period, which is far from the truth.
They're going to have a problem with them people from Sentinel Island.
Yeah.
Them people crispy black. Yeah. Ain't African whatsoever.
Right. They found DNA evidence we brought out on the show before that E1B1A was found on the coast of Italy. Sicily? And that when you bring it to 7,000 years ago. Come on, man. 7,000 years ago. So
helping them develop agriculture.
Agriculture, that means we had to do dealing with maritime trade. That has so many implications that does not fit the running narrative of the conscious community. That we'll run around naked with wooden spears.
You know,
which is awesome.
They have a hard time grasping that they could possibly descend from what the ancient world considered the greatest people to ever exist, the Phoenicians. I think they have an issue with that. The people who brought writing to the world, especially the modern style of writing to the world. Ones who brought trading all across the Mediterranean, the ones that other people considered gods walking upon the earth. They have an issue with that. I don't know why. I would love to be from that legacy. You know what I'm saying? I root for that legacy because I understand that a great ancestor that we call Solomon, that the Bible also gives the name Jedediah, which can be found in the Amarna letters. That man commissioned that fleet to go out and do that. So, you know what I'm saying? That's a part of our legacy, but they don't want to connect to that. I don't get it. Why throw away such a great legacy?
Because the Bible comes from the white man, brother.
Well, that white man love to talk about our ancestors, boy. They wrote about our ancestors like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, man. That's the ultimate answer right there. The white man did it. Which I don't know why they make anything inherently wrong, too. That's another topic. But
Well, the white man gave them their mindset, so they need to flush that down the toilet.
right. Yeah, man. Yeah, a lot of y'all are dealing with the colonial baggage. Where were we? We were right here. The term being used interchangeably with African have particular cultural content thought as being indigenous in connection to a conception that make those so identify part of an entity that was conceived to be isolated from the rest of the world. African, in this case, would seem to be used to connote living peoples with a particular phenotype whose bodies collectively are the repositories of a particular genome. And that's what we want to talk about. Repositories meaning anytime you see black people, they all share the same genome, right? But that's not true. And we're going to get into it. It said this notion of blackness derives from the received race concept, and it's a taxonomic schema modulated through a tradition of stereotypes. The irony here, of course, is that the region that encompasses so-called Black Africa is the same place that contributed heavily to the emergence of our species, which was likely assembled with ancestries from supra-Saharan, Saharan, Eastern, and Southern infra-Saharan regions. Black has been and is used in other Western discourses as a referent to various non-African peoples, specifically certain of those in the Pacific region in Asia. Those will be your Negritos people. So it has its own subjectivity. How dark must skin be to be called black? It is different in different places. Australian Aborigines, Dravidian Indians, New Guineans, and Melanesians, who are also dark or black in color, were all called black in the context of colonialism. Black has sometimes been used to mean simply non-European and non-Far East Asian in the British context. Professor Layla Ahmed, a light-skinned Egyptian, noted being called black when she was a student in England in the 1960s, a practice now discontinued due to the refinement of social taxonomies in England, or maybe the objection of some groups who used to be called black. It is well to note that in ancient northern Africa, the African of Roman times, there was a variation in the phenotype of people. This was also true in the northern Nile Valley. In the early Islamic period, there are some interesting ironies related to the notion of blackness. Ubadah ibn As-Samit, the appointed envoy of Amir, commander of the Islamic or Arab forces that entered Egypt, was initially rejected by the Roman prelate, apparently because he was black. The Arabs of that era told the prelate that they held blacks and whites in equal respect and that Ubadah was one of the best among them. Ubadah informs the prelate. So the Dr. Muntaser is going over this information, showing the hypocrisy of the use of the word black. And I tell people this now. I say, well, you have Negritos that are black. And what they will say is, well, they're not black. I'm like, what the hell is black? You know what I mean, black. No, I don't know what the hell you mean. I have no clue what you're talking about. What the hell are you saying about black? You're telling me black people are determined by the color of their skin, and I'm showing you various groups that have the same gradation of skin color, like the Negritos, like the Andaman Islanders, and so on and so forth. Why are they not considered black in your eyes, in your perspective? And you can't give me a logical, reasonable answer because the classification that's being used is fickle. It's fickle, and you are just trying to isolate that term and make it exclusive to the people that come from sub-Saharan Africa or the African Americans. Let's keep reading. So this is the quote from Ubadah, the Arab envoy. It says, there are 1,000 blacks as black as myself among our companions. I and they would be ready each to meet and fight 100 enemies together. We live only to fight for God, to follow his will. We care not for wealth as long as we have wherewithal to stay our hunger and to clothe our bodies. This would This world is not to us. The next world is all. So this is Ubada. He's saying that he's black and his army is black. This is from the Islamic period. These are what we would call Arabs, and they are describing themselves as being black. This passage indicates that Ubada feels himself to be part of this community. In this era, Islamic scholars considered to be Islam's golden age, and one of equality that would later change with various developments, including some levels of bias against the darker skin colors in some regions, as well as other biases. Of course, black and white are relative terms and socially modulated. Kamil documents numerous blacks who were a part of the early Islamic community and even regarded as heroes, some apparently buried by the Prophet Muhammad with his own hands. And there were the black pre-Islamic notables like Antar and later Islamic figures like Al-Jahiz. This was also, who have down through history been called black or some equivalent. These cannot be overlooked. Statistically, the numbers of those who become notable remembered is suggestive that there was an even larger population. How many of these Arabian blacks and their families moved into super-Saharan and now Valley African is unknown. It is important to say that they were not slaves. And that's another thing, because then when you see black people in history, you always equate them to slaves, which is not true. But that's the psychological damage of the poor education here in America. That's the psychological damage, where you think anything that deals with black is slave. Anything that deals with white is royalty. That's where that comes from. This classification system that is very fickle and broken. Let's keep reading. What were the geographical origins of Ubada and his other black companions or their ancestors? Was there an indigenous black population in early Arabia but Asian in origin, like the Dravidians, or a population that straddled East Africa in Arabia, quite possible, or early Holocene prehistoric migrants that participated in the building of primitive Arabian populations? Primitive Arabian populations. Were they the descendants of Eastern African converts who returned to Arabia with the early Ummah community that had been sent to Ethiopia by the Prophet for safety in the earliest days of Islam? Or were they descendants of other known Eastern African slaves or migrants, residents in Asia, or solely historic slave descendants, a favorite trope of some researchers, or some composite of these? The example of Ubada and others in early Arabia negates the notion of blackness equaling Africa in the way that this is often simplistically done. And that was the point of bringing this up. And he did it so eloquently and so beautifully, showing you that you can't sit here and try to stick a trait, a phenotypic trait, on one people and say, well, these are the black people, when you have numerous of examples of other people sharing the same the same traits, the same looks as these people, like the Andaman Islanders. They're not related to many of the sub-Saharan Africans, but they look sub-Saharan African. They DM174. They're related to the Ainu of Japan, and the Ainu of Japan look East Asian. So again, blackness does not mean uniform. Blackness does not mean a monolith. Just because you black doesn't mean you belong to a monolith of people that all share the same common ancestry. That's a lie. And a notion that's been passed down through the public school system. And it's being taught and reverberated online by the conscious community. So again, let me read it again. The example of Ubada and others in early Arabia negates a notion of blackness equaling Africa in the way that is often simplistically done. Yet this view lingers across disciplines and in popular discourse. Of course, it would be of interest to understand how a notion of ethnicity fits into the early history. It is also of interest to understand how and when anti-black prejudice emerged in the Arabo-Islamic world, breaking from the early egalitarian tradition, given that some Arabs sometimes called themselves black, at least in comparison to more northern peoples. Such prejudice was not apparently developed in the same way or degree that occurred in the West, and had no effect on some Arab groups as they migrated into tropical areas of Africa, with the men marrying local women or taking them as concubines. In other cases, whole groups merged with indigenous populations. It is also beyond the scope of this chapter to explore this issue further, but it's clear that received notions of race and racial schema are highly problematic. It is important to say that all indigenous, endogenous African populations are not homogeneous in appearance. Let me read that again. It is important to say that all indigenous, endogenous African populations are not homogeneous in appearance. So can we stop going around saying all Africans are the same? Can we stop going around saying that all black people are the same? Can we stop doing that? Because Africa is not homogeneous. Black people are not a monolith. We are not all the same. We do not all share the same ancestry. We may share common features, but that does not mean we are the same. And this is why you get fickle explanations for certain things. Like when you say, well, the Andaman Islanders are black, and then someone will repeat and say, well, they're not black. What the hell does black mean? It's very
sorry. They are black. I mean, they blue black. So I don't know how you get black blacker. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Oh, shit. Let me keep reading. The Islamic period is often presented as having absolutely changed the northern regions, somehow making that history not a part of an African world or totally changing its people. Some view the migration that occurred as simple, massive settler colonialism of Arabs, or those composing the early Islamic migrants. The reality is far more complex than this. All right, so we're going to go to the next section. Ratio-typological thinking. The stereotypical idea about Africans in Africa as conceptualized in racial thinking in the received racial schema has had an influence on the interpretation of morphological and molecular data. This has come from a model of racial typological thinking applied to human populations in general. Races were conceptualized as a foundational or fundamental units and conceived as being not only represented, but defined by an idealized narrow set of physical characteristics, otherwise called a type. A type as a concept could also be based on gene frequencies of specific lineages. Variations from the type was interpreted to be evidence of admixture or an aberration. In this way of thinking, names imply very discrete groups or individuals which are different in kind and seen as being only distantly connected, and sometimes in the 19th century as being of different species. Even when the larger racial schema are not used, there seems to be a tendency to think in terms of discrete populations consisting of uniform individuals, which were sometimes described as types, such as the Nordic or Alpine. In real breeding populations, however, there's a variation at the molecular and other levels, although perhaps restricted phenotypically to the eye, and types are abstractions, although extreme variance may be real if not actually representative. Traits or trait complexes were conceptualized as having necessarily a single origin. In fact, individuals and populations may have multiple genealogical connections to other populations. If they are not very genetically similar overall, some of these may be ancient, reflecting a deep time relationship due to shared ancestry or ancient gene flow. Others may be more recent due to recent gene flow. Assumptions that generalize to regions for one or two populations or individuals, as in some discussions of gene flow, are merely versions of racial thinking. The use of samples from single populations like Yoruba to represent the African or even infra-Saharan African or tropical African is not defensible on theoretical grounds because it ignores the heterogeneity of Africa. It is congruent with the notion of the Negro type only as African. That this idea persists in various works reflects something about sociology of knowledge, not a critical not a critical evolutionary science. There were results of analysis of groups intended to portray population history or historical processes, often expressed in dendrograms of plots, which are acceptable as long as their limitations are understood and disclosed. The results so expressed are intrinsically attractive, but are incomplete without a discussion of process and interaction. The source of similarity, including microconvergence or parallelism, and the problems of assuming that all data are equally good for making comparisons, misleading results could occur if various kinds of data are not critically handled. Care has to be taken when describing or interpreting patterns in culture, biology, and language. Attaching genes to current speakers and language families in an obligatory manner under the assumption that in early history, the speakers of ancestral language family were the sole ancestors of those currently speaking descendants of language is problematic and wrong. And that's another thing I want to touch on. If you look at who was speaking ancient Hebrew, and then you see people that speak Hebrew today and try to connect the two, you can't do that. Because you can say, well, the white Jews, they speak Hebrew. You don't speak Hebrew, so how the hell are you a Jew? That's not how biology works. Language is not passed down through sex. All right? Because we pass down our genes through meiosis. Meiosis happens when sperm and egg meets, and it takes 50% of the dad, 50% of the mother's DNA, and they swap and mix and do gene conversion. Language is not a gene. Language is taught while you're alive. It's not made in the womb. All right. Attempting to classify languages based on genetics of their current speakers in principle is wrong. The splits within a language phylum are not causative of biological population splits based on mutations or natural selection and vice versa, although they may sometimes track with each other in some specific circumstances if geographical spaces is involved. But social customs and endogamy can be isolating as well. Early population history cannot be assumed to be a story of entities with obligatory linked genes, languages, and cultures. Even strictly in terms of biology, population history is not simple gene history or vice versa. This is an area where critical scholarship is very important. There's also the issue of the context of the interpretation of the data. When should a given discipline lead the narrative? Does one look at genetics first to interpret a cultural or historical pattern, or does one look at chronologies or patterns determined by archaeology, history, or language, and use of genetics within scale and time depth or are important to this question, as well as the kind of narrative that is of interest. It cannot be said enough that gene history is not population history. Population history is not to be equated with social, political, or cultural history. Furthermore, how and why genes flow across space and populations cannot be answered by the genes themselves. The fact is that sperm migration are gene independent. The social interactions that permit gene flow are not properly of the genes themselves. So also this is important. So when we bring up haplogroup J and say, well, haplogroup J is said to be these people, Nati Tafar, you are not blocked. I can see everything you're saying. Hey, shalom to the family that came out and showed y'all support. Shalom, shalom, shalom. So I want to get back to the reading. The social interaction. So I want to deal with that. So a lot of people say, well, you're interpreting the information about what the genes are. Yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. Genes don't speak. Genes don't talk. DNA doesn't speak. It doesn't talk. So we look at the human migration patterns and we'll see E1B1A in Israel, which is majority of African Americans haplogroup, and we'll say, okay, if it's in Israel, we can make the assumption that we come from that area or we have a history in that land because we see the genes there. The gene's not going to get up and speak and have a dialogue and have a TED talk and tell you that, hey, we come from Israel. We have to interpret the data as such with the evidence at hand. That's how you do it. All right. It's called the law of parsimony. Occam's razor. What makes the most sense? All right, let's keep reading. It says, how we use genetics in developing a narrative of specific people or kingdom is an important open question and not a question at all for some scholars. For example, can genetics genomics teach us anything about the Foon's history as opposed to their ancestral identity in a narrow, particular kind of way? And would the genetics give us an appropriate time depth to speak of the Foons as Foons specifically, as opposed to elements in their ancestry? This question about the ranking of data deserves ongoing critical examination. A naive empiricism will not work. The errors of affirming the consequent and misplaced concreteness are to be avoided. Another notion that influences how Africa is or has been conceptualized has had to do with stereotypes or perceptions of social organization. Africa, specifically tropical Africa, in keeping with the stereotypical use, has been and is conceptualized as a place with numerous isolated peoples and or tribes who individuals have a putative common ancestry with a primordial origin. All right, now putative means pretty much a hypothesis, what we think, right? That's what that word putative means. And a lot of people that were like, well, scientists don't think, they don't believe. That putative actually means believe what we believe to be the truth, or what we believe happened. That's what putative. Scientists use it all the time. Law of parsimony is saying, well, we have these ideas that we believe took place or believe can explain this phenomena. Which one is the best one? Which one out of our set beliefs lines up with the evidence the best? So scientists
do deal with the lead assumption and
right.
Things like that.
Right. And that's why a lot of people had this misconception about scientists, that scientists are just these all-knowing beings, like they omniscient. Like, no, they're human like you and I. Stop.
And that's a philosophical concept. Just to be clear on that, people don't understand that. You use that in logic and reason every day. You have 1,000 different options. You'll be like, well, which one seems like is the best? That's the law of parsimony.
Right. It says the idea of closed and isolated groups, in essence bounded by a lot biocultural entities, have often been implicitly employed in much work. This will be further discussed later. These ideas from a backdrop and implicit mental template to the way Africa is thought about, even when not explicitly stated. For example, published work on the genetic history of Africans often does not generally include the whole continent or examine the interconnections of all of its regions. Even though it is generally agreed that modern humans arose in Africa, it's not always clear what the concept of genetic history encompasses. So here's the next section: Africa, evolution, and peopling. It has been postulated for some time that modern humans emerged in Africa. And again, postulated means dealing with what they believe, what they believe happened, right? That's what it means to postulate. It says perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 years ago by recent estimates. Confidence intervals are large. What does that mean? The intervals are the time segments and time units that they're using here are large, meaning they don't know if this estimation of time is accurate because of the error gap is so huge. It says by modern is meant a suite of characteristics that permit an identification, and genetics, anatomy, and behavior that relate living people to these distant ancestors. This emergence in Africa is believed by proponents of the theory to have been followed by migration within and out of Africa. The ensemble of biology and culture called modern humans seem to have emerged in Africa from the interaction of populations from several regions, including the Western Saharan area. It is also possible that modern humans learned some forms of symbolic behavior from Neanderthals, which speaks to a cognitive flexibility. Various scenarios and routes from the exodus from Africa and the locations for the emergence have been proposed. Interpretations of some genetic data suggest interactions leading to gene flow from other hominid populations, often called archaic and understood as being of different species. Although it might be preferable to see all of these other populations as being subspecies, however, it may well be that some of the genes being labeled archaic are simply asymmetrical retentions from the ancestor that led to both modern humans the other species or subspecies, Denisovans, Neanderthals, and possibly others in Africa. But this is not enough. This is not thought to be likely by most investigators. Modern humans may not represent a speciation event which would have largely reset aspects of the genome. Whatever the position taken on this matter of taxonomy, the narrative would seem to indicate the emergence of a core population or network of populations in Africa whose biology is predominant in all living humans. These early humans are postulated to have left Africa in the permanent or successful colonization of non-African regions between 40 to 70,000 years ago. There are also some evidence of sporadic earlier out-migration as well. This means that between the time of emergence and migration, 100,000 years of biological and cultural history elapsed, making this early modern human story in Africa an African one. The full implications of this have not been explored in terms of biology or anything else. Serial migration and founder effects can be said to characterize subsequent human biological history, with new mutations being under adaptive and perhaps social selection, augmenting differentiation, along with gene flow and drift among local populations and back migrating to Africa. I want to make a real sidebar on this. Let's take this time scale that they're giving us and let's take it face value. We do understand that white skin, and this is going to kill the argument that all black people are the same as well. We do understand that white skin was not introduced into the earth until about 7,000 years ago. They're saying that colonization of non-African regions, and I know for a fact, according to their time scale, Europe was colonized by humans, modern humans, about 40,000 years ago. So they were there for almost 30,000 years. 30,000 years, and they did not develop white skin. So what does that tell you? Climactic theory is not true. The climactic theory is not true. And what the climactic theory teaches, and this is a tidbit of information, the climactic theory teaches that if you go to colder regions with less sun exposure, quote unquote, which doesn't even make any sense, in colder regions, you still get UV rays. You will develop less melanin expression and your skin will lighten. Well, these modern humans were in Europe for at least 30,000 years, according to the secular time scale. Excuse me. And they did not develop white skin. So that proves that the climactic theory is not true. All right, let's keep reading. Serial migrations and founder effects can be said to characterize subsequent human biological history, with new mutations being under adaptive and perhaps social selection, augmenting differentiation, along with gene flow and drift among local populations and back migration to Africa. A simple tree with separate non-interconnecting branches will not adequately display this history in production of variation. Rather, a range of ways to depict these can be envisioned. During this long period, it is reasonable to postulate that modern humans had sufficient time to become differentiated at multiple levels. This differentiation is inferable from many data sets. Although mutation rates are not known with certainty and confidence intervals are large. Why is that important? Because what happens is people say, well, this time frame doesn't line up with your model. Well, these time frames are based on mutation rates, and mutation rates are not known with certainty. And the confident intervals are large. They have a large margin of error for these dates. So you'll see 100,000, 200,000 years, but you have competing dates that are like 4,000, 7,000 years ago, 13,000 years ago. That's because, again, this is all inference to the best explanation. In this period of at least 100,000 years, it is possible that many lineages, as represented by the uniparental markers, that's your haplogroups, emerged and became extinct, along with other markers and even morphological traits. Morphological is dealing with the shape, the form, the phenotype. That's what morphological traits are referring to. It must be said that this differentiation, be it in molecular or morphological traits, cannot be called ratiation. So just because you have a different morphological set doesn't mean you're from a different quote unquote race are the creation of races. That means, like we've been telling y'all, you can have somebody that has European features. Yeah, and Ngozi been spreading information and disinformation too. You can have somebody that has European features and be related to an African American. A person with haplogroup E can be related to someone else that has European features, because it's not about your features. Because features does not mean raciation. Black skin doesn't mean raciation, a different race. It doesn't mean that. Or a different bioethnic ancestry. It doesn't mean that. We're related to Adolf Hitler. We're related to many white men that have the E1B1A marker, even though they look totally different from us. You understand? We're related to these people. Like the brother brought out the British people, the British man. You have the Coomber family that were all E1B1A, and they look like white European males. So that's why we learning this scientific jargon for a reason, because it's leading up to that, showing that all Africans are not the same. And I'll debate anybody on this topic. I debate Ngozi. I debate, bring your best. Whoever you want me to debate on, are all Africans the same? I will take that debate, because that is a modern myth that needs to be smashed. Let's keep reading. It says, furthermore, the range of phenotypic variations is not completely known. Genes for skin color, such as light skin color, has been found to have multiple, including African origins. Let me stop there. Having white skin, the gene from it has an African origin. So can we stop saying, well, Esau is the brother of Jacob, so how could he be white? Africans carry A11T. Africans can carry SLC24, I believe A5, the genes for light skin. They carry that. It just doesn't express. So if they pass that down to the subsequent generations, it can come out and express. So yes, white people do come from Africans, or black people, if you will, because all of these nations were black at first. We read the articles on the channel. The whole earth was brown skinned at first. Exactly. It's just a mutation. Shout out to Low Avenues. It's just a mutation. Exactly. Right. Lyndon Johnson was E1B1. Albert Einstein was E1B1. Napoleon was E1B1. These are all men with European morphology, European phenotypes, stringy hair, light skin, different eye colors, different noses. They didn't have prognosticism, right? Wide nose with big lips. They didn't have those things. But they are genetically close to us. Nicolas Cage, thank you. Nicolas Cage. These people look like Europeans, but they are genetically, we have a genetic affinity to them. We are very close to them. We share the same most recent common ancestor, most recent common male ancestor. So this argument that Esau can't represent white people, or his descendants can't represent white people because he's the twin of Jacob, is nonsense, because that's not how genetics work. The whole world was brown. And even if you believe the biblical narrative, you believe that all three sons share the same father. So even if you said, well, Japhet was the white son, you're still saying that a black man brought in white skin. His son, his descendants brought in white skin into the world. You're saying the same thing. Because you have differentiation, we have variations in a kind or in a species. Look at dogs. Look at Chihuahua. Chihuahuas are very different than any other canine, right? They're very small. They're very different than the Great Dane. That's usually the Great Dane. But it's a variation of the same damn kind through mutations. Hello, somebody got to be listening. You know what I'm saying? Ahaya B. Praise says every E1B1A M2 dominated nation in Africa had a belief in an omnipotent supreme being that we call by different names because of different dialects. Right. And that goes into the acculturation, and over time, language changing, customs changing, stuff of that nature. Hybrid Praise says another misinformation that Eurocentric scholarship keeps portraying is that we were all animists, which is a base lie. No, everybody wasn't animist in Africa. Low Avenue says, Unc loves talking about UV maps on Sinetta. Well, Unc, you're welcome to come on the show if you're watching, or maybe someone who knows him. You're welcome to come on the show. We can discuss population genetics and we can discuss climatic theory, and you will get smashed because how are humans in an area for 30,000 years and didn't develop white skin until 7,000 years ago? It's just a mutation, man. Just a mutation that happened through a founder effect. The founder effect, it happens after a bottlenecking event. And we know modern Europeans come from a very small, I think like 3 males or something like that, or 3 clans got together and made majority of modern Europeans. That's a bottleneck. They were able to bottleneck that. And when you have a bottleneck, you only have a few individuals. And if one of them has a genetic variation or mutation, like white skin, it's easier to spread amongst a few individuals. You understand? And then as that few, let's say that one has 5 children and they all carry that gene, then they have children, they all carry that gene. So on and so forth. They're able to spread and populate and create a population with that gene expression. In this case, white skin or light skin, or however you want to say it.
Yeah, it was those hunter-gatherers in the Scandinavian region that originated. Started to originally express earliest.
Right. Because we know, according to Cheddar Man, the history about Cheddar Man, all Western Europe was black until 7,000 years ago. They're living in these regions where, if climatic theory was true, they should all have white skin. All right. So.
If climatic theory was true, every Eskimo should be Snow White. I'm talking Scandinavian, blonde hair, blue-eyed white.
Facts. Right. This had nothing to do with the climate. This has everything to do with gene variation, man. All right. So it says genes for skin color, such as light skin color, have been found to have multiple, including African origins. And more of this kind of discovery should be expected. However, what is consistent with this long evolutionary history is that before modern humans left Africa, they were highly variable and likely achieved potential for even greater genomic plasticity. Gene flow from other subspecies or species of Homo, along with drift, serial founder effects, and adaptive selection in new environments would have contributed to variability, even though those who left Africa were only a subset of people existing at the time. Fossils from this period are not numerous. There's a variability. There's evidence for modern anatomy or something near it, and modern behavior in Northwest Africa. The Nile Valley, Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa, as is well known, the Middle Stone Age of Africa is the time and context for the emergence of documentable modern humans from an African ancestor. Conceptually, this geographical spread is important to understand because it negates the idea that early modern human developments were confined to Southern and Eastern Africa. The oldest described mitochondrial and Y chromosome haplogroups found in living human populations emerged in Africa, but exactly where cannot be said. Current locations are not necessarily a guide to the local of ancestral emergence due to migration. The lineage. Oh, let me say that real quick again. Current locations are not necessarily a guide to the locale of ancestral emergence due to migration. So again, if you find a skeleton and you find a fossil in the ground, that just tells you where it died. I'm gonna just put it in plain English. Doesn't tell you where it originated from or where it came from. You just know where it died at or where it was buried. You understand? So it doesn't speak to the question of origin of where these humans came from. As the lineage largely confined to Africa are also the earliest documented modern human lineages, now selectively called African, since there are other lineages outside of Africa. Although these two are derivative from African sources, Although there is DNA evidence of interbreeding with modern people, neither Neanderthal or Denisovian mitochondrial or Y chromosome lineages have been found in living people. And it seems that Y haplogroup found in one population of living people, the IMBO, is apparently older than the age traditionally given to fossils remain designated as a fully modern. This is not surprising, and it does not mean that the IMBO are living fossils. Modern humans emerged from pre-modern populations in Africa, and by definition, there is a connection no matter how invisible it may be. The recent findings that Neanderthals demonstrated symbolic behavior is not surprising, given the observation about other species, whether or not archaic Homo like Neanderthals are actually another species or merely a subspecies race of Homo may be a matter of taxonomic preference as opposed to a matter of nature. But obviously, more research may be informative on this matter. It would be of interest to find ways to systematically explore the genomes to look for evidence, genes, and detrimental gene-gene interaction of non-modern origins. Regardless, Africa remains the place of the origin of the source code of living humans. and to have a source code, you got to have a program. I'll just have to throw that in there. So the next part, shout out to the chat, man. We rocking and rolling, man. You know how we rocking, man. Let's get it. The next part is human variations in Africa. The molecular variation of humans in Africa has been said to be the greatest in the world. This has been one element in the argument that modern humans emerged in Africa and is presented as supporting the fossil and or symbolic evidence from the Maghreb, Congo, Nile Valley, and Southern Africa. It has been found that diversity in sub-Saharan Africa is great at the morphological, metric, and molecular levels. Descriptions, even in older literature, can be informative after wading through older or prejudicial language and interpretations. We can use the writers of older literature as informants for descriptions, not interpretations, even though the descriptions may also be problematic. There was great diversity that was observed in the past. The explanation for the diversity is another matter. In terms of morphology, this may be somewhat surprising for those who may have a stereotype idea of what constitutes the real African phenotype. The late Jean Herenoutz, with a critical eye, noted that in one region of East to Central Africa, there is a wide range of population means or frequencies for many anthropological characters. And some of them, the whole of the world range is covered in the subcontinent. Here live the shortest and tallest human populations. The one with the highest and one with the lowest nose, the one with the thickest and one with the thinnest lips in the world. In this area, the range of average nose widths covers 92% of the world range. Only a narrow range of extremely low means are absent from the African record. Means for head diameters covers about 80% of the world range, 60% of the cephalic index. He noted this long before the surge in molecular data. Herenoutz indicates that there is also great diversity in dermoglyphics, hair form, and skin color aspects of cranial form and serological traits in tropical Africa. When the supra-Saharan region is considered, the diversity increases. The observations made by Herenoutz about tropical Africa morphological variations were not unknown to some Westerners before the late 20th century. So again, before we move on, this shows that there was a variation in Africa, and these people knew this. But the lie that every African was the same and all Africans look, they all got big lips, they all got big noses, that has been pushed on us. And that we all have a uniform ancestry, that we all come from the same people. That is a lie that has been pushed on us through and propagated through the public school system, through groups, rogue groups like the Conscious Community, Ankh and Ngozi, those type of people that are not studied, that regurgitate information from outdated scholars. You understand? And they're just simply wrong. But that's what we here at the source, to correct that information and give you guys a clean, clear perspective on the matter. It says, the observations made by Herenoutz about tropical African morphological variations were not unknown to some Westerners before the late 20th century. After the description of the extreme morphological variant or the ensemble of traits called in some literature of the true Negro or Negro type, one writer from the 19th century noted that no single tribe, however, possesses all of these deformities. The color of the skin passes through every gradation from ebony to black to copper colored as to the skull in many tribes. The jaws are not prominent and the lips are not swollen. In some tribes, the nose is pointed, straight, or hooked. Even Grecian profiles are spoken of, and travelers say with surprise that they cannot perceive anything of the so-called Negro type among the Negroes. So again, they're showing, this was in 1888 when this was published, they are showing that there's a variation amongst these inhabitants of Africa. Some of them have the straight hook nose. We know the hook nose is Jewish, right? Jewish nose. That's the Jewish nose, the hook nose. So they had that variation. They had the small skinny nose, the white girl nose, as y'all call it. So again, you cannot put a phenotype on race and say, okay, everybody that has this phenotype is from this particular race. We can clearly see that that's not the case here. Elsewhere, the variability is observed again with some quaint language. What is called the Negro type? That is the low type of the coast of Guinea. It's comparatively the exception, perhaps as much so as the low Irish type in the Celtic race. There are jet black Negroes with woolly hair and noble orange features, or black people with frizzled and even straight hair and regular features, or blacks with flowing hair and ringlets, or light brown people with woolly hair and European forms and face, or light brown with Negro features. That's 1863, people. We can ignore the use of the term low as a subjective notion of uncertain meanings to current readers, but with likely negative connotations at the time of its writing. Others also present similar descriptions, which are sometimes accompanied by aesthetic valuations, and also the idea that only one physical type in terms of craniofacial traits is truly African. Thus, the emergence of the root of an incorrect idea that sometimes still haunts ontological conceptions about Africans. The amount of diversity at the molecular level has been established and confirmed in tropical Africa in many studies. The morphological and molecular data contradict the idea that sub-Saharan denotes an entity consisting of uniform individuals. So when people say, I'm talking about only sub-Saharan Africans, that does not mean uniform individuals that all look the same or are all the same, or Black Africa, as they call it. The diversity on the molecular level and morphological level has proven that, has debunked that. As a type, this notion can be summed up as a stereotype idea that most of us have about what a true African looks like. Perhaps the best example is the famous anatomist Petrus Camper's criticism of European painters' depiction of mongoose traditionally said to be of African origin. Camper, the inventor of the facial angle, said that Europeans had merely painted Europeans dark or black and gotten the details of the underlying boning structure wrong, i.e. the traits which later came to be declared the signature of the Black or African were not present. For some later anthropologists and anatomists, these traits will be seen in a combination as a marker of the Negro type, later called the true Negro, a concept which never had a surviving European or Asian analog in science, even as a foil. There is no true white or true yellow type or group that was ever consistently used in discussions or even devised based on reading of various older works. In other writings, true was equated with pure. Camper was actually wrong in his criticism of artists and saying that they were inaccurately depicting the magus, which means king, as an African, because he apparently assumed that all Africans looked a certain way. And that's what happens today. This is what you do. Africans got to look a certain way. That's what you mean when you say, well, he's not black. It says, however, he was correct in criticizing them for merely painting Europeans dark or black because while similar physiognomy, the Eastern Africans are distinct on inspection and by craniofacial mensuration. The artist probably had not been exposed to a range of variability of Africans, even those in the tropics. However, as noted, other Europeans were aware of physiognomical variability in those those having darkly pigmented skins. Morphological variability in Africa has also been described in the 20th century by researchers other than Hernous, usually in works that look at more local populations in various regions. The interest here in descriptions and not the taxonomies of the past of taxonomy in general, although it is interesting and sometimes useful, the issue of interpretations of the origin of this variation is another matter. Usually this is rooted in the racial or categorical thinking with simple act mixture between foundational groups being an explanation for variation. For example, Kuhn 1950 presented a description of a group they called Hamites, which they restrict to a part of Eastern Africa. Some peoples of East Africa seem to be skeletally Mediterranean but dark-skinned. Other writers following Seligman 1930 used the term Hamitic to cover a range of peoples and phenotypes found primarily in Eastern and Northern Africa below, in, and above the Sahara. In terms of morphology, Montagu stated, among the Hamites, skin color varies all the way from the white to black. Head hair varies from straight to frizzly. The face is never prognathious. The lips vary from thick to thin, but are almost never everted as in the Negro. There is in general paucity, meaning lack of, the word paucity means lack of body hair, and the head is mesocephalic. Meso meaning between, cephalic is the skull shape, so it's not broad or narrow, it's in the middle. So again, he's pointing out they're using antiquated knowledge by saying Hamite, but what they're pointing out is the variation of these black people. So if anybody tell you that everybody in Africa look the same or are the same or uniform, they're lying or they're misinforming and spreading disinformation. So it is interesting that Montagu cited Seligman here because Montagu, an opponent of racism for most of his life, quotes in the same textbook the core cultural contention of Seligman's biased Hamitic hypothesis, namely that the Hamites conceptualized a distant community of Asian immigrants brought all noteworthy culture to Africa. It is puzzling that Montagu did not critique this, did not see the contradiction of the idea to his own beliefs, as well as interrogate its validity on numerous points. The Hamitic hypothesis resonated negatively in some colonized countries, even playing a role in the Rwandan genocide due to the teachings about the groups that they're called Hamitic or Hamitic influence. Ideas have consequences. In Rwanda, there had not emerged a widely taught human science based on the work of critical endogenous scholars who could have countered teachings that divided the population based on a notion of superiority. The social context of science is not value-free. In Northern and to some degrees Eastern Africa, there was a diversity that one label denoting a category of uniformity will not cover if that is the purpose of the name. This is a very diverse grouping of all called Hamites, including but is not restricted to ancient Egyptians, Somali, Fulbe, and the diverse Berber speakers, the Amazigh, encountered by the Phoenicians. What seemed to tie these people together for certain researchers was an elongated face with narrow nose and face and ornate profile. Irrespective of color or hair form, it was also assumed that these people spoke closely related languages, which is only true for some of them. The coastal northern region of Africa, like Eastern Africa, has a history of known interactions between specific peoples. Berber speakers are often noted for sometimes having very pale skin and light eyes, but they can actually have a range of color, hair types, and facial features, and this was more likely true in the past. Based on ancient writings, the population that there were diverse and including dark-skinned people, although today this has been perhaps obscured in recent memory, both by the descendants of recent infra-Saharan and Saharan blacks who may have been as strangers and others. For example, the Ethiopians of the ancient Maghreb do not have unbroken connection to a distinctly identifiable community that lives today. And in any case, this would only be expected if those ancient Ethiopians and others had not been a part of a general community that merged over time, i.e., if there was discrimination of particular self-isolating cultural tradition, the assimilation of the European capitals and others over the last 1,000 years would have also had an impact. Now, I want to make commentary on this as well. what was being brought out about the Berbers, where it says, notice sometimes for having pale skin and light eyes, they're a mixture of black and what we call lighter skin or white skin individuals. Many of them are of the E1B1 variation, which is important because it shows that there's variation in phenotype within the same group of people that are genetically connected. So again, these people look different, but they are genetically connected and they share the same common ancestors. So you can't judge someone based on how they look. All right? Can't say who they come from based solely on how they look. All right, let's keep going. The Nile Valley inhabitants, specifically the Egyptian Fellahin and Copts, are described as being medium height, brownish skin with straight nasal bridges, a range of eye colors, lips of medium thickness, and medium stature, although there is much variation. With some Copts being notably lighter in skin color, it would be interesting to know what the attitudes of the ancients toward each other vis-a-vis this diversity were, versus later attitudes. Neither the Greeks and Romans nor the ancient Egyptians record commentary or ideology that can be called color prejudice. Although there was conflict and no doubt ethnocentrism, the description of Hamites presented by Montagu based on Seligman is a signal to any critical analysis that there is a problem. It is of historical interest that in Seligman's view, the Hamites were Europeans from Asia who imparted all measure of interesting culture to Africa, except curiously forming to tropical Africa, and brought the Hamitic language family. Seligman did acknowledge that others thought their origin was in Africa, but his ideas still have an unrealized influence in many ways, such as the idea that Afrasian languages are not African in origin. The idea that Hamitic languages, now part of the group called Afrasian, Afro-Asiatic, originated in Asia is not supported based on general linguistic approaches using the principles of greater diversity and least moves, along with the location of the member of the family, which seems to retain the most ancient features of the ancestral group. There's also other evidence. For example, the reconstruction of Proto-Afrasian indicates that its speakers were hunters and gatherers, and zoological inventory includes ancestral donkeys indigenous to northeastern Africa. It's also known that some of the groups phenotypically classified as Hamitic by Seligman do not speak Afrasian languages, for example, Tibu, Fulbe, and Tutsi. What is the source of the biological variation? The old classic answer involved various migration theories that invoke admixture between different races and or types, and an example of the Hamitic hypothesis was frankly biased against those conceived as indigenous Africans. However, some researchers did invoke adaptation to explain at least some or even most of this diversity, at least in the tropics. It is probable that adaptation, gene flow, genetic drift, founder effect, and perhaps social custom chance have affected variation, but all in the context of African environments. It is known that with a small amount of one-way gene flow per generation into a population, with or without selection favoring the genes in question, that frequencies can change appreciably in several hundred years. Let me read that again. Frequencies can change appreciably in several hundred years. So what does that mean? You can have a base population that looks a certain way, that have certain traits, and those can mutate or change in several hundred years, meaning their descendants in the subsequent population, those that come after them, could look different or have different traits than the parent population. Another reason why you cannot judge people solely on how they look. All right, so it says, it has been shown that modern Egyptian population was affected by migration during the Islamic period. It was also affected during earlier periods where there is evidence for marriage with Near Easterners and others. However, any ancient migrants from this era and before have been assimilated into local populations subject to their social and physical environments, such that the genes now reflect a local Nilotic population history. More interesting than the dissection of the genetics, genomics of the population or as individuals, the place of emergence of synthesis and the circumstances of interaction. Other populations in the eastern half of Africa show evidence of gene flow, but only in some cases can this be traced to known ethnic movements from specific places. Now, I want to make a comment about the Arabs of Egypt. The Arabs of Egypt have been called these marsh Arabs. They don't belong there. They invaders. But many of the Arabs of Egypt have haplogroup E, E1B1B markers. They come from the same parent stock that majority of African Americans come from. So I don't understand where this bigotry is coming from. You're saying they look a certain way, but genetically they descend from the same males as you and I. It is likely that the genes flow through networks of several populations, perhaps were affected by drift or adaptation. There has not been a full discussion or perhaps even acknowledgement of the overlap and autosomal variations between modern populations that left Africa and those that remain, i.e. the source population. Analogous to the NRY marker M168. Autosomal variations in modern humans in Africa would have been regionally variable. Not all regions were likely represented in the immigration from Africa. The modern humans who left Africa were likely from a restricted region, for example, from somewhere in the northeastern quadrant of Africa, from the Mediterranean to the Horn. That population would not have been autosomally the same as one in southern Africa, the Mendelian population elsewhere. It can be asked why some of the autosomal variation that is called Asian or Eurasian when found in Africa is not actually African in origin. This should be logically be the case given evolutionary history, and likely is so. This observation will change the characterization of aspects of the Saharan super-Saharan genome. As noted, Africa is often restricted to sub-Saharan Africa, where there is no scientific reason to do so. There is fossil evidence for early or near modern humans in Saharan and super-Saharan Africa. The molecular data showed that all of the population's bioethnic groups of the region still have evidence of indigenous African peoples that predate the known historical contacts with Near Eastern and Europeans. For example, the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Hyksos, the Persians, and the later diversity of Near Easterners during the Islamic period. One trope that needs to be interrogated intensely is that the trans-Saharan slave trade, a favorite explanation for certain findings that is overdone. The example of the Ubada and his comrades has been mentioned. The early Holocene Sahara during its wet phase was resettled by a diverse population who interacted on a dislocation, their descendants' migration to circum-Saharan regions. This wet Sahara can be conceptualized as a site of metapopulation in which populations fused, fragmented with, and experienced some extinctions as desertification proceeded. Migrants would have gone in various directions to circum-Saharan regions, carrying a number of genetic variants. It is of some interest that the Benin haplotype of the sickle cell gene is found in the western tropical Africa, the Maghreb, and the Nile Valley, specifically Egypt. A study of pre-dynastic ancient Egyptians remains revealed a sickling gene. What does that prove? That these people were migrating and dispersing into different areas. They would go into the west, north, and Egypt. Africa, they would go into these different areas. It says, which was not further characterized, but the clinical description of the remains is possibly consistent with the Benin haplotype. The Y chromosome biallelic lineages are perhaps the most interesting indicators of connections of the regions of Africa. The majority of males in most regions of Africa bear E haplogroup lineages defined by the M96 marker. The E haplogroup is either a majority or plurality in the large regions. They show that the regions of Africa are interconnected at the time of depth after modern humans left Africa by E haplogroup Y chromosome lineages. The PN2 or P2 ancestral to both the V38M2 found in most of the infra-Saharan tropical Africa in M215, M35 defined lineages. The latter found in Eastern Africa up to Egypt over to Morocco. The E haplogroup family tree shows that P2 descendants lineages are deep within the family tree, not at its base. It is interesting that the basal split in the family occurred in tropical Africa. The P2 descendants are the most numerous, Although there are other terminal subclades within E, it bears repeating that the lineage that seem to be the most common in super-Saharan and infra-Saharan Africa have a common origin in having P2 ancestor. This contradicts the foundation of the received racial model of Africa that implies no direct connection other than that of a shared ancient humanity or that created by a gene flow via voluntary or forced migration. It is not known when the E group reached its current distribution. Its defining marker is old, but some derived lineages are young, having like arisen within the mid-Holocene, specifically the P2, M35, M81, M183, which is found in very high frequencies in some Amazigh, which is the Berber communities. Remember we brought up the Berber earlier? They have E haplogroup, and many of them are white, many of them are dark-skinned. So they have a variation, white with light eyes, light blue eyes, but they related to us. It says, and in others in the Maghreb. The young age of M81 raises interesting questions about the interaction of population that would have led to its spread and about the origins and regions that are no longer populated. What is that history and who were the subjects? This is the history that is of greatest interest. What were the social circumstances of interactions over time that led to the widespread distribution of this lineage among the Amazigh? M78, the brother clade of M81, is older and also found in the Maghreb, Horn, and Nile Valley, with migrants taking it out of Africa, perhaps by sea, to the Aegean during the late Paleolithic, Epipaleolithic. So these people with E markers, which are our ancestors, people we're connected to genetically, were postulated to been able to do maritime trade, to sell across the Mediterranean and go into the Aegean Sea around Greece, Athens, places of that nature. Says the other African haplogroups in origin, namely A and B, are also found in Eastern Africa, notably in Sudan, Ethiopia, and scattered among others such as the Batwa, Central Africa, and the Khoisan speakers in Nubia, Southwest Africa. A and B are sporadically found in other regions of Africa, including the Northern Nile Valley, Egypt. Now, I'm going to do a lesson on A and B and who, if the Bible was true, with the nations, who would be the Hamites, the real Hamites, the descendants of Ham. It would have to be A and B. It would have to be those groups. They're the original Nilotics. They are in these areas in Northeast Africa that line up with what we would call the biblical places of Ham. So stay tuned for that. We will be breaking that down here on the channel. It says, when an old A lineage having been found in Northwest Super-Saharan Africa in the border regions of Africa, haplogroup J is also found in Egypt, Ethiopia, and Somalia, and it can be disputed when it arrived. Although the era of grain agriculture has been suggested, given the migrations into northern Africa during the Phoenician and Islamic periods, a J contribution surely occurred at this time. Haplogroup R1V88. This is a European haplogroup. Watch this. It says, normally associated with Europe and the Near East, is found in high frequency in the central South Sahara, Sahel among Chadic speakers. This lineage likely came to Africa in a back to Africa migration. Its age is older than the Chaldeic language family and is not a marker of that family's emergence or movement, which is an example of layering of population effects. There is an irony associated with the R1 presence in these Chadic speakers that bears pointing out. There was a resistance by some scholars to the Chaldeic family being a member of the Afro-Asiatic based on the external phenotype of its speakers, a stereotypical African variant. The fact that this particular population of Afro-Asiatic speakers, although the samples are limited, usually has a higher frequency of a European Asian lineages than Berber speakers. More northern coastal peoples is kind of a new thing that Pliny was speaking about. It is indeed ironic that those that what can be called the stereotype African facial morphology and very dark skin are precisely those with the European haplogroup. Again, you have these Chadic speakers with haplogroup R1, which is a European haplogroup but they don't look like Europeans. They look like typical, what we will call atypical African, right? Dark skin, wide nose, big lips, the whole nine, woolly hair. They don't look like Europeans, but they descend from Europeans. And my understanding of this, my parsimonious explanation of this, these will be the original inhabitants of Europe, Cheddar Man's population. That's my breakdown of it. So Cheddar Man's population most likely would have shared some features with what we call the Chadic speakers today in Africa. All dark skin, all black people, but they have European DNA. All right. It says, it is indeed ironic that those with what can be called the stereotype African facial morphology and very dark skin are precisely those with the European haplogroup, while others who are phenotypically more resemble Europeans are often predominantly of the E haplogroup. So you share, if you're African Americans, most likely from haplogroup E, you share the same male ancestors as some of these white folks, man. And that's what we keep trying to tell y'all, educate y'all in here. Oh, it's boring. Well, you got to learn this stuff, man, because if you keep going with the misinformation, disinformation, it's not going to get our people nowhere. All right, let's keep it going.
It's boring, but they talk about it all day.
Yeah. I guess misinformation and wrong information is exciting.
Because it sounds like something mysterious and new. You know what I'm saying? They just made that up in their own damn head. That's why.
All right. So it says the R haplogroup is also found in notable frequencies in some other populations of Saharans, namely the Nilo-Saharan speaking Tibu, and also in the Sudanese sample of the Fulani. None of this means that any of these specific groups as foreign biocultural entities came to Africa from Asia, let alone Europe. The lineages have been transmitted through several populations. The most likely scenario is that when the bearers of R1 came into Africa, they got spread into a region in or adjacent to the Sahara and may have been spread around during the time of its greatest inhabitability, the period of the so-called Green Sahara. This is when the Sahara could be seen as having meta-population consisting of groups belonging to various language families whose speakers did not live in a sealed world of exclusion, but migrated between groups, as was the case in pre-colonial Kenya. A random, not representative sorting out of male and female lineages in a broadly Pamitic environment likely explains differences in frequencies of male and female lineages due to various social and chance circumstances. In some cases, it's likely that pastoralists absorbed each other or allowed intermarriage in more recent times, something known from the Beha in Egypt and Sudan who absorbed Arab males, thus adding a different Y chromosome lineage. There is the genesis of the Swahili peoples, whose ancestors developed a coastal and maritime culture that came to absorb many from the Indian Ocean world, and even to look outward away from the African hinterland. Then there's the Madagascar, whose main language is Malagasy, whose genealogical background is about equally half Eastern African and Asian, specifically Indonesian. The various scenarios resulting from bioethnic interactions of various sorts deserve serious attention by African scholars who are perhaps more actually aware of it. And it's just like James brought out earlier. The paper by Morjani shows that we have bioethnic interaction with those people that call themselves Jews today, because our DNA is within their admixture that goes back to 1,000, 2,000 years ago. And then for the main group, I think it went back to the time of the kings, man, the 9th century BCE, before the 8th century BCE.
Shoot, you got some. Yeah, that's to the main, to Israel, to the time when they saying that this common ancestral population existed was between the 8th, 6th century BCE, around the time of the diaspora was about to begin. But when we went to Iraq, it go back 1900 BCE, like around the time of Abraham and stuff that they was in that region. But we know this because we know the E haplogroup was in that region because it's responsible for spreading farming, civilization, and I believe it is the haplogroup of the Sumerians. That's my stance. We don't really have any evidence of it, but if the E haplogroup was there and the most ancient culture there is the Sumerians, it leads me to that conclusion.
Right. Employing the law of parsimony correctly. All right. Where are we at? The various scenarios resulting from bioethnic interactions of various sorts deserve serious attention by African scholars who are perhaps more acutely aware of it. More examples will be given of interesting historical scenarios ripe for exploratory discovery science that considers the physical and social environments. It is also important to note that in all geographical regions, there is a diversity of male lineages, and this has a history that can be recovered. In summary, the E haplogroup connects the regions of Africa, obviously to varying degrees. This observation, extracted from the data of various Y chromosome studies, negates the Saharan boundary, which means that what we brought up earlier, we are not from a static ethnic group, meaning we wasn't stuck in one region of the world for thousands of years, like many of these conscious community leaders are regurgitating.
And what you said about Indonesia also supports that, because that was before European interaction. That you had that with Indonesia, with Madagascar is pretty much, like I said, half Indonesian, half East African.
Right.
Then you have some yams found in Nigeria. They from Indonesia. This is before European contact. This is clear evidence that people that you call quote unquote African wasn't confined to that continent. They was trading with Europeans, Asians, Far East Asians, in India. They was trading everywhere. But they feed you this concept of everybody was just bottled up there in Africa doing nothing. When you look at what Hitler was saying in that Time magazine thing about the Nazis on the stands against Jews, when you see the Oriental he have in the picture, that's a brother. That wasn't no Chinese man that he had in the picture. It was a brother dressed up in China garb. But people don't study deep. They don't look for this. But then the thing is, a lot of stuff we've been talking about studying before we looked at the DNA and stuff like that, the DNA is supporting it, only hardening our stance. That's the whole reason I really started digging into DNA and science like that, because I was like, hey, if it's true, it's true. Science can't make up nothing to lie when they doing it by the scientific method like that. So let's look at it. Let's see what it's talking about. And the more I look at it, the more it holds true to what my ancestors said took place throughout human history through that biblical perspective. And I just think it's true. And I don't think there's nothing that can stand against it. And everything we bringing out right now and beforehand and in the future will be supporting that fact.
Right. And we're willing to debate it. We are willing to debate this information, man.
With standards, not whoever sounds good. No rhetoric wars. Yeah. Sorts up or shut up.
Yeah. You're gonna have to do like we doing today. We presenting the literature, and we're making our arguments based on the literature. You guys just really freestyling, man. And I think y'all from the same part of the world we from, Texas, because we were real big on freestyling when we was young, and I think y'all done brought and implemented freestyling into the scholastic world, man.
Little flippers. You know
yeah, little flip. Oh, snap, man. All right, so in conclusion, it says this observation extracted from the data of various Y chromosome studies negates the Saharan boundary. So there was no, like we just brought up, we trapped somewhere for thousands of years. It's numerous of evidence refutes that. Oh shit! Hold on, let me go back. I just skipped all the way ahead. But as we were saying about that, again, the trade, the haplogroup E, we did videos on haplogroup E, bringing in a lot of Asian things of origin like bananas,
Mm-hmm.
coconuts. That's not of Africa.
Chicken.
Chicken comes from Asia.
Yep.
You understand? So if these people are bringing in all of these Asian influences, how can we come with? I mean, what's the best explanation for that? You know, what's the best explanation to reconcile the fact? Here we go. Reconcile the fact that haplogroup E brought in all these things, and also we read a book on the channel that brought up that many of these what we would call Jewish traditions is spread throughout Africa. What spread it through Africa? You understand?
Which shows that we amalgamated with many populations in Africa, like we've been arguing since forever. Everything leads back to these facts that for some reason nobody wants to really debate us on, bro. I don't get it. They swear we wrong, but every time we say step in the ring, let's have a debate, bring up these sources. When we have a preliminary, what they want to do, argue about something else. Find a reason to attack you, to try to sabotage the debate before it's even set up.
Right. They were, I don't want to debate that. That's the debate if Jesus walked on water or not.
Like, hold up, brother. The whole thing is I'm not an Israelite. That's what I want to debate, whether I am one or not. Yeah. I don't care about nothing else. I don't care about whether you believe it. I don't care about whether I believe what my ancestors said. I'm saying I descend from them people. Now let's look at the evidence. That's it.
Come on. And then we be trying to call these cats out on shit that they said verbatim on their channels. And they don't even want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Not unless you come on a rhetoric platform, a rhetoric war platform.
Yeah, you got to come over here so I can out rhetoric you, man. I'm not here to out rhetoric nobody, man. I'm going to source up on you, man. And that's it.
So I can mute you when you get to killing me with the sources.
Yeah.
Garfield,
yeah, man. Garfield, you got that bad. Man. You love spinning narratives, too.
But like I say, I commend him for bringing to the part of on there to whoop his ass. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. To the perfect. Listen, man. To the perfect corrected you, silenced you, had you looking bad, man. Because everything that you speak against is pretty much brought up in that video.
For real. And then he had sent asking about whether we had a question to ask him. I'm like, I ain't got no questions to ask him. I agree with the man. You don't want to disagree with him. You know what I'm saying? But I do appreciate him for reaching out.
Yeah, I did it again. Yeah, man. Yeah, Garfield, you a character, man. You really a character from the funny pages. Yeah, you are aptly named, brother. Garfield. But sometimes you got to wake up and smell the coffee, man. You know what I'm saying? Wake up and smell the coffee and realize that a lot of the stuff that we bringing up is concrete. And you kind of put your foot in your mouth in a few videos. Like one video, this brother said, I'm saying all of them are fake. I'm not just saying y'all fake Jews. I'm saying the Eastern European Jews, they fake too. Then he followed up and said, well, they got to be the real Jews. They keeping the tradition. Which one is it, bro?
Which man speak with forked tongue.
Right, man.
Yeah, black skinned European.
Man, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. All right, let me get back into this. It said this was not the goal of the researchers who generated the basic data, but it's something that the generalist scholar interested in contextualizing information in the history of ideas would see and make important. The predominant lineages from the E haplogroup are P2 descendants who account for the lion's share of male descent in the whole Africa. The E haplogroup most likely emerged in tropical and infra-Saharan Eastern Africa, as did all of its subclades. The best total evidence is consistent with the EM96 marker emerging in Eastern Africa in the late Stone Age. Borrowing from the language of the evolutionary process used in reference to speciation, but projected onto the infraspecific level, it can be said that Eastern Africa was the possible region of sympatric or parapatric differentiation of E haplogroup, and notably of the P2 subclades. The differentiation was not allopatric. The M96 ancestor did not spawn different clades on different sides of the Sahara as a basal split. And that's all allopatric means, different areas. The cultural association, if any of this, have yet to be worked out in terms of possible meanings in archaeology and deep time linguistics. When lineages of known non-African origin are excluded, such as these found in border regions of Africa, but also in the interior of the Sahara, as with Chadic speakers in the Cameroons or Chad, the frequencies of the lineages of African origin increases. These data show that genealogical connections of substantial numbers of males from all regions of Africa, irrespective of phenotype. This is what we've been saying this whole video. You can have a genealogical connection of a substantial number of males from all regions of Africa, irrespective of phenotype, meaning it doesn't matter how they look, they still are connected genealogically. And that's the point. They can look like the white-skinned Berbers, or they can look like those Indonesian-looking Madagascarians or Malagasians, however you say it, and still be connected to haplogroup E. Still have the same male descendant, the male ancestors, same lineage. It is worth repeating what effects gene flow can have and remembering that genes do not construct identity. Mating practices could also theoretically greatly influence gene frequencies and magnify the effect of the number of founders. For example, polygamy could magnify a particular Y chromosome lineage in the population, assuming the birth ratio was normal. So foreign males taking numerous local wives, all things being equal, would via their male offspring alter and magnify the frequency of foreign lineages over time in their new geographical residence. Beyond the numbers of founder males, ironically, at a smaller scale, if they maintain ethnic boundaries, they would, through polygamy, increase the frequency of foreign mtDNA lineages within their own group. This has implications for sampling strategies, population nomenclature, and generalizing findings to whole regions from possibly unrepresentative samples. Interpretations that estimate the number of founders based on the percentage of lineages could also be skewed if mating practices are not considered. So he pretty much invoked polygamy, which I believe polygamy is the reason why, one of the reasons why haplogroup E pretty much dominates Africa, because that was the practice that they used. Yeah,
definitely the reason. I mean, it's pretty much just saying very clearly to the people, I think something most of us would understand. Hey, if us as black men went to Europe, stayed in Europe, married, let's say we married 2 or 3 white women apiece, our kids did the same, sooner or later they're going to look white. That's all that's saying.
Yep.
With all of the white mitochondrial DNA that's accumulating. That's it.
Yep, because you get your traits from the mother side as well. So that will do it. Defining versus describing Africans. There's a problem of how things are defined when perhaps the issue is how they should be described and with what new language. How are the African world and peoples to be conceptualized in studies involving biology for purposes of understanding genetics and health and disease, as well as certain historical and evolutionary questions? What are the hidden biases or grossly wrong assumptions? In some sense, the African, non-African dichotomy, which is often extended even to African soil, represents a sort of static schema that does not incorporate a fully evolutionary or historical perspective. In fact, based on lineage data, the world divides into a subset of Africans and the rest of the world, which includes Africans. But this observation is only heuristic. The biological diversity of Africa has been mentioned, but it is well to note that the linguistic diversity is also great on different levels, not just language families, but also other aspects of the elements of language. This reality leads to asking about defining African. Should it include recent settlers like the Europeans and Asian Indians in South Africa as former colonies? What about the Arabic-speaking populations of Nilotic and Super-Saharan Africa who have been previously mentioned? Super-Saharan African would seem to be an example of culturation with language shift in the Maghreb, with more migration from Near East having taken place in the Northern Valley. Real quick, I want to say this. This is a good question when we're saying, well, all Africans are the same. We're all African, blase, blase. Okay, where do we draw the line? Who's an African? What's not an African? Who do we consider African? Because we have many people living on that continent. Many people with different variations in phenotype living in that continent. Different genealogical implications are here. Different ancestors are here in Africa. So what really makes an African? This is a really great question that's in this book. And this is what I would like to pose to many of the Afrocentric, your Umar Johnsons, the conscious community leaders. This is the question I want to pose to you. What about these other groups? How are you factoring in these other groups? What are you calling them? Are they African as well? It says Egyptian government spokesman in the 1950s claimed that the supposed racial differences between African south of the Sahara and Arab Africa in the north was a tool of imperialism to create a rift and division, and also stated that there has been a mixing of people up and down the Nile Valley. They also stated that while modern Egypt had a share in the east and the west, what is still an African entity, even if the reasons at the time for stating this was purely political in the context of Egypt being surrounded by enemies and uncertain distant kinsmen who spoke Arabic. It is an accurate assessment of Egypt's Africanity. It has to be reported for emphasis and clarity that there is a history of ideas about Africa and Africans that focuses on tropical Africa as being the real Africa, as being discussed. Underlying or associated with this perspective is the traditional racial construct and schema, rooted in ideas that certain numbers of racial types emerged at some point in the past, migrated and mixed to produce variation. The idea of Africa has often been confined to tropical or sub-Saharan and sometimes Saharan Africa. The implications being that the population of Northern Africa were only geographically African, but had no grounding in Africa. Conceptual clarity and descriptive precision are what is needed in new discussions of Africa. Various people have bioculturally assimilated non-Africans, but also sometimes changed languages themselves. Of course, during the Greco-Roman and Islamic periods, there were substantial migrations from non-African regions and biocultural assimilation between groups. It is important to remember that there were indigenous people there, specifically in the Amazigh and the ancient Egyptians, both of which had assimilated others after their ethnic emergence and had complex biological histories prior to the crystallizations of their identities. Neither of these people disappeared, but via interactions, they were changed. We still have Amazigh and Nubian Egyptians, Beha, and others who have assimilated or been assimilated. They often adopt a new language, religion, and customs, but aware of their origins. We have Arab tribes who assimilated indigenous Africans in the Sahara and other regions. Another instance is that of the Arabs who were assimilated by the Amazigh. There are Arabized Africans, the ancient Nilotic peoples from Alexandria to Khartoum and parts of the Maghreb. Many populations have multiple ancestries and there are multiple descendants. Identity is another matter. It is possible to be a descendant of X group, but not socially identified as X at present. I want to stop here because I've used this quote in one of my slides. So this goes back to identifying based on how they look or do social and cultural identification. Many of us that are African American, we're claiming a Jewish lineage now. We're claiming Israelite lineage. And many people will use, well, the world don't identify you, society don't identify you as such, so why should I? But you got to understand, just because in a modern time frame, in present day, we're not identified socially as these people, we're just Black or African American, does not mean we're not these people or we don't descend from those people. Again, the geneticist says it so eloquently. It is possible to be a descendant of X group, but not socially identified as X at present. Social rules have a role to play in determining social identity, which may not have much to do with blood quanta. So social recognition that has nothing to do with DNA. It's just what people believe, what has been taught as truth, what has been taught to be the case, like the Jews with the East European Jews that are in the state of Israel today. They're socially accepted. It has nothing to do with DNA. It's just based on them going into the land in 1948 and their story against our story, pretty much. This is not a genetic question at this point, per se. It is about how we wish to conceptualize biocultural history. It bears repeating that all things being equal, a small amount of one-way gene flow, even 1 to 2% per generation, with all offspring remaining and marrying into receiving population, and normal survival can have profound effect on gene frequencies, and therefore the biological profile over a not so long period. The regions of Northern Africa all have primary genealogical connections to others, more subtly regions to one degree or another. The regions of a northwestern and Nile Valley Africa all have fossils of modern humans that predate the likely expansion out of Africa. They both currently speak or use or have a history of speaking languages of families that arose in Africa. While they have biological profiles that indicate non-African admixture, the process that led to this took place in Africa and was subsequently shaped by African environments. These populations pose an interesting question. For some, a problem, although it need not be seen that way, that of untangling what is unique to them that arose in Africa. We can extend this by asking a rhetorical question. If there's a concept of Eurasia, why is there no concept of Africasia, which in various biological situations would have as much or more validity and would have likely be useful in numerous discussions, as stated earlier. The bounding of populations is not usually mind independent, i.e. natural. Given the interest in indigenous populations here, it can be argued that Africans should, for the purpose of this discussion, be restricted to groups who have substantial genealogical connection to populations whose biocultural identity, including language, emerged in and was shaped in Africa, even if these have been modified over time. The locale of biological and cultural history is the focus. We can modify a position from a focus on the indigenous, a sometimes loaded I didn't went further into the book. Let me go back, y'all. Let me go back. Bear with me. Clicking on the page. But Muntaser was getting ready to how he defines the terminology African, right? Because it still begs the question for most people, how are you determining African if you're saying things like everybody in Africa is the same, but then you have these groups of Arabs? What about the Egyptians? What about the Sudanese people? What about the Amazon? What about all these other groups? What about the migrants from Europe? What about R1? So again, he's still touching on that. Let me get back to where we were. We went into chapter 2. Forgive me for that, man. I accidentally hit the scroll button. I'm not used to the Nook Pro platform. But we're finna get right into it. We're gonna get right back into it, y'all. Hey, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Source Gang, you know how we rocking, man. Let's get it. All right, I think right here, mind independent. Given the interest of indigenous population here, it can bear to argue that Africa should be the purpose of discussion. Next page. Right here. All right. So, given the interest of indigenous populations here, it can be argued that Africa should be the purpose of discussion. Purpose of discussion be restricted to the groups who have substantial genealogical connection to populations who bioculturally identity, including language, emerged in and was shaped in Africa, even if these have been modified over time. The locale of biological and cultural history is the focus. We can modify a position from a focus on the indigenous as sometimes loaded term with sometimes to the colonist discourse and speak of the endogenous. Instead, endogenous in this instance is adopted from Huntunji's usage to describe the state in which the communities have assimilated various cultural practices and made them their own. These new practices are not seen as foreign. They have become part of the fabric of the daily existence. Endogenous, when deployed to cultural bearing biological populations, would mean groups that have bioculturally assimilated others into their social, cultural, and physical spaces in an ancestry over time, such that the specifics of the encounters with new people have been forgotten in some sense or simply accepted as part of who they are at the time. This perspective is useful from an Edic perspective and acknowledges that there may be tension between it and some emic perspectives. There's no one way to be African. I also want to make mention of this. In the Bible, I think in the book of Chronicles, the 4th chapter, it talks about an Egyptian marrying into the Judite family. And he marries into the Judite family and has children within the Judite family. Shishan, right. This would apply. Right. The term endogenous would apply. This man would adopt the culture of the dominant culture, which would have been the Israelite culture, and taught his children that. His children would have had that culture. You understand? So social culturally, he would have been considered a part of the Israelites, right? All right, so let's move on to biological variations in social organization. Social organization has been shown to correlate with levels of genetic heterozygosity. One measure of variability. One explanation would be that more complex societies with the apex of soon to be states or state-like societies have tended to incorporate more diverse populations, as well as naturally increase their population sizes over time, such that even if the society has a self-concept of being one nation or one people, it has accumulated genetic diversity due to its history. A critique of the narrow state-driven concept of social complexity is beyond the scope of this presentation. More complex societies also tend to be larger, and the population size has an intrinsic positive correlation with genetic diversity. All of this is relative since recent studies on some groups who are conceptualized and haven't been isolated evince more molecular diversity based on their age, or at least the age of some component of the ancestry. It is important to make this distinction since no living population should be viewed as a kind of fossil or relic. Diversity can be measured in different ways. The issue of social organization is also nevertheless important to consider because it is important to avoid the idea that in sampling a particular group that one is sampling, as noted earlier, an entity like the notion of tribe as critiqued by Ogot. Africa and all of its regions was home to various kinds of social organizations. State-level societies emerged in all quadrants of the continent before the colonial period, although all people did not create them. The more generally known of these are in or near the Nile Valley part of northern Africa, such as ancient Egypt, Nubia, and Aksum. In West Africa, there were the Sahel Belt states and kingdoms of Old Ghana, Mali, Songhai, Kanem-Bornu, and Segu Tukulor state, as well as small entities like the Bandu, Futa, Halon, and the Futa Toro. In the forest belt of West Africa, there was the state of Ashanti, Oyo, Benin, and evidence of greater centralization in having kings in the past, and Igbo land at the site of Igbo Aku. In West Central Africa, the kingdoms of the Congo, the Luba, and others were also the products of local development. Zimbabwe, Zulu, and Swazi kingdom states have been well described. In Northern Africa, the ancient Amazigh societies emerged on the coast as well as the Sahara, with a range of Sahara organizations through time with evidence of early interactions with other people. These include the Gaetulians, the Mauritanians, the Numidians, and the Tingitanians, who fought the Romans and Carthaginians who were transformed from Phoenician settler colonists into largely admixed entity who claimed their region of Africa as home. The ancient Egyptian state acted and interacted with people from the south, west, north, and east during its long history, having emerged on the banks of the Nile from a complex interaction. There were Nubian polities from the early times. The Garmantian kingdom emerged in the Sahara before the Common Era. Later in the Islamic period, there were a series of states in northern Africa which had various connections to Near Eastern centers, but were never without some indigenous roots, such as the Fatimids and the Almoravids. Various kingdoms rose and fell in this period. Egypt in this era was a major center. Northern Africa experienced a political history that included many people coming into its space. In the Sahara or its fringes, there were other state societies such as the Emiratis in northern Nigeria and Darfur. In Eastern Africa, there was various kingdoms and communities that exhibited complexity in other ways. The Swahili city-states such as Kilwa, Mombasa, and Sofala are the best known for its Eastern African entities south of Ethiopia. But there were other societies and early iron smelters in the interior and the interlacustrine regions of Central Africa. There were several kingdoms such as Toro and the kingdom found in Burundi and Rwanda. Some of the pre-European entities such as the Hausa Emiratis still exist as moieties at some level within the post-colonial newly named states and what is now Sudan. There was the Fun Sultanate, in some sense perhaps successor state to the Nubian Christian kingdoms such as Alodia sampling. These are areas to ascertain ethnogenetic heritage, may or may not reveal something about the histories of those who created and participated in different phases of the kingdom. Another kind of social complexity that does not necessarily involve the process of creation of states deserves some attention. Pre-colonial Kenya was home to societies that were more interconnected than indicated by conceptions often associated with societies assumed to be small, closed, and homogeneous. However, some societies, peoples that are not in themselves states or kingdoms, are heterogeneous in origin and now as named entities, even composed of an old ancestries. One example is Taveta, who emerged in the 18th, 19th centuries when various groups came together, created a new people, society, and so-called social organizations. Ogat made the following general observation. By the end of the 19th century, the African communities in future Kenya were already contaminated by each other in a complex, independent human world. There were no watertight ethnic categories. Numerous clans, lineages, and sections of clans expanded and contracted, gaining and losing members. The migration of segments or absorption of other ethnic groups produced considerable complexity. New communities and new languages were often the result. Hence, the colonial idea of a tribe as an isolated and closed group is certainly a myth and ultimately a racist concept. So when we try to group these African groups, Rob Bourne, into a certain tradition or certain custom or, certain belief system, that's really a you're really missing the point here. And misrepresenting these people, because just because they are into these different groups or different cultures does not have any impact on their genealogical connections. This passage makes some very serious points and amplifies concerns relevant to critical work. If this description is accurate, it has implications for sampling and for doing human biological research differently. It may indicate a new way to do certain types of research. It could be called a kind of wealth because of its relative uniqueness. Returning to history, Ogat points out that 30 to 40% of the Baluya clans were originally Kalenjin, that several Luya clans are of the Masa origin, and that the evolution of the Abaluya was still in progress when the East African Protectorate was declared in 1895. Ethnic entities emerged that had multiple origins but adopted one language, like the Abatarichi and Taveta. There were relationships between the Samburu and Rendille pastoralists, despite differences in language, family, and subsistence style, with divisions of the Cushitic-speaking Rendille assimilating to the Samburu clans, including joining their age sets and marrying Samburu women. This was not an isolated case. This picture can be multiplied across the territory that was to become Kenya in 1920. There were no pure ethnic groups. Each group was dynamic and living unit whose continuity depended less on its purity or single origin than on its ability to accommodate and assimilate diverse elements. Most of the myths, legends, epics, and rituals once come across in stories of migration and settlement are meant to facilitate the process of integrating peoples whose origins are diverse. Ogot gives a more telling example of complex ethnogenesis hidden by name. The Tafeta people of Kenya coast may be taken as an excellent example of nation community building. Their history reveals that refugee groups comprising of Pare, Shamba, Kamba, Taita, Chaga, and Arusha fleeing from the famines and conflicts in their respective home areas settled in the Taveta forest in the 17th century. By the 19th century, the heterogeneous group had developed distinctive common culture and evolved landholding clans and central institutions which unified the migrants into a single people. There was also widespread intermarriage between the clans and the adoption of the Pari language by all these clans, which greatly assisted in welding them into a cohesive nationality. The roles of culture, common central institutions, language, intermarriage, and nation building are clearly demonstrated in the case of the Taveta. When colonial literature later portrayed the Taveta as a tribe in the sense of an exclusive, primitive, and static society, it was in effect inventing a primitive community whose presumed needs and hopelessness could be used to justify colonialism. In the case of the Taveta, we have a group of community breeding population whose origins are diverse. The Taveta as an entity is the genealogical intersection of many groups at the levels of biology and culture. The Taveta are one people out of many. The recentness of their emergence does not negate the reality of their existence. They can be an example of African peoples and others who make much out of differences, especially the African peoples who have assimilated negative ideologies and redeployed them in ways that hinder development. Applying this information to work that is populated centered requires a change in thinking that assumes that groups are continuations of primordial groups that have singular origins and have remained endogamous. While there are examples of some ethno-religious groups that have retained a high degree of endogamy, this is not true in many places in Africa where Western geneticists have been at work. So again, I want to make commentary on this. So again, the argument against Israelites is, where are these groups that retain this endogamy, that retain this culture for thousands of years? But just like Dr. Muntaser is pointing out, that's very rare in Africa. Because it says this is not true in many places in Africa where Western geneticists have been at work. So you don't see it remaining because of acculturation, joining other factions, other groups, and you exchange those ideas. So it's hard to find something like that stretches back thousands of years because of that. It says the results of a study used to construct population history could be wrong in its conclusion if only genetics is used. An example would be an analysis that concluded that the Taveta diverged from another group a certain number of thousands of years ago. This would clearly be wrong since there were no Taveta before 1800. Assuming that the methodology is correct, the conclusion, assuming it to be computationally valid, would reflect the idiosyncrasies of the sample. One might say that the average genome of those identified as Taveta diverged from the comparative groups, and while possibly statistically valid, this would be meaningless, i.e., unreliable in a substantive or historical sense. The result that might say something about some of the ancestries of Taveta and determining this would require another kind of effort. We must always keep in mind that two or more populations could be genetically similar, but culturally or linguistically different, and that the reverse is true. So again, you can be genetically similar and culturally different. We brought that out earlier with the fact that African Americans are related to people that look white. You know what I'm saying? And carry different cultures. Some look Indonesian, some look Asian, some look completely different, have different cultures, different social backgrounds, but genetically, you're similar, you're the same. Again, the culturally and linguistically similar groups could be genetically different. Much depends on how we measure differences in the goals of the work. In general, the writing of population history as seen in genetics literature on Africa has not undergone the kind of scrutiny and vetting that philosophers of history write about in terms of the kinds of bias that may exist in historical writing. Population history is, after all, a kind of history, and such should be required to not only present accurate genetic information, but also the issues of accuracy and the plausibility that concern historians. The facts of the social organization in history described by Ogot are not compatible with the view of the populations connected to them can be treated as isolates in the primitive isolate or the anthropological populations of an earlier anthropology. It is clear that depending on the purpose of a given study, any conclusions of a historical nature have to be informed by some historical and social understanding of the populations, and indeed individuals from them, since identities may be multiple. All human population individuals are related, but to varying degrees in varying ways. Human variation, depending on the levels of interest, the data used, and questions asked, can be described in terms of networks, clines, phylogenies, and clusters. All right, so now we're going to get to the summary of chapter 1. It says conceptualizing variation in Africa deserves to be informed by an understanding of and sensitivity to the history of ideas that has shaped how Africa was viewed in their ongoing legacy. The terms Africa was first applied to parts of its northern coastal regions and their hinterlands, where peoples with a diversity of external phenotype were observed. Biological Africanity is not confined to one physiognomy, genome, phenotype on any level, or genotype. Biohistorical Africans are highly diverse and complex at the anatomical and molecular levels, and this is consistent with evolutionary theory. This diversity has to be fundamental starting point, and no effort should be made to parse it onto units of uniformity or purity. The various evolutionary forces should be actively recognized as contributing to variability. Africa did receive ancient and more recent migrants who were largely bioculturally assimilated to varying degrees, with some African peoples adopting new languages before the period of European domination. Racial typological thinking has to be abandoned in approaching Africa. Some data are intersecting this regard. The quadrants of Africa are connected by males of the E haplogroup, which is the most common male lineage in Africa. The population bearing the E haplogroup apparently emerged in eastern tropical Africa after modern humans left Africa and spread to all major regions at varying time depths. This is also true for A, B, and R haplogroups in the sense that they do not tell you about the phenotype or culture of an individual who may have them. So again, it goes back full circle. Those that may have these phenotypes and cultures or whatever are these different genetic groups, haplogroups A, B, R. You'll see their phenotype, but it doesn't tell you who they are. It doesn't tell you their ancestry. It doesn't tell you their genealogical connections. These genealogical connections cut across geography, language families, breeding populations, ethnicity, and physical appearance. So again, you can have a different physical appearance, a different culture, different everything from a person and still be genealogically connected to that individual. How genetics is integrated into the study of African population history will benefit from considering time depth, social structure, and practices and data from other fields. Genetics will not necessarily have a primary role in generating narratives at macro or micro levels in the period after the emergence of current language families, when genetics should be allowed to dictate the framework, if ever, of a narrative versus archaeology, history, or language is a methodological issue to still be resolved, as it makes a difference and may change the nature of the project. Social organization in Africa exhibits different forms of complexity. This has implications for research and interpretation, for understanding different kinds of history beyond states, kingdoms, and migrations. Scholars with the skills and insights of OGOT can contribute significantly to the reconceptualization of Africa and approaches to the synthetic work. Indeed, as new schools of European historians have emerged, one would expect this of Africa. This chapter has been a sketch of some issues. It's only the beginning, sounding board for ideas behind aspects of this work. This chapter is dedicated to my mother, my late father, my wife, and my children. And that is the chapter. All right. So we're going to pick up on chapter 2, which is the history and genetics in Africa and the multidisciplinary efforts, tomorrow. I'm going to end there because I don't want to drag on. I know it's a lot of information or information overload, but the core of this video was pretty much covered. We're talking about the diversity of the African continent, that we can't judge people solely on how they look. You have to dig deeper because, again, genealogical connections cut across physical appearance, how people look. It cuts across culture, the traits that they may have, the customs that they might have. It cuts across that. And that really sums up, especially if you're an Israelite, this knowledge is pertinent to your walk and to your faith, because you need to understand that, because you're going to be attacked by other people, especially from the conscious community, based on these things, based on physical appearance. They're going to tell you, well, you don't look like a Jew. What is that based on? Social acceptance, social and cultural identity, how people look at and what has been defined as a Jew in present time. You have to know this information. You have to know genetics. You have to have a basic and core understanding of these things to combat people like that, combat people of that nature when they come to you like that. You have to know that over time, traits and customs can change. A group of people can adopt new customs. They can like many of the African customs that our ancestors have. Many of those customs could have been adopted through acculturation, through intermingling, through marrying. We could have gained and gleaned those traditions from those people. So it doesn't mean that, just because you find a particular tribe or particular people practicing something, that they don't have anything to do with another group. In this case, we're talking about the Israelites. So this is very pertinent information. Go ahead, James.
I was just about to say, because, we got to combat these people who love to just go after the low-hanging fruit. They shallow, man. So we got to make them go ahead and climb that tree of knowledge and get that good fruit way at the top of the tree, getting all that good sun rays, all that good sunlight, man, because that's what we're about here at the Source. We're about sourcing up, shedding up, getting deep into that knowledge and not just sitting on them surface level like a lot of these brothers do. That's why they can't go into the information. They can't give you anything in depth about genetics, in depth about the history. All they did was read the back of the book, not even the book, just the back of the summary of the book and the title of the book, and then tell you they read the whole book. That's what a lot of these brothers out here doing. But what the brother Jashub doing is so pertinent, because what he doing, he opening up the book to the world. You reading right along with him. They can't lie to you then. You seeing what's written right there. And I want to commend this brother for going out, getting these books, getting this information, and then presenting it to y'all, because ain't nobody really doing it like this in the community. Everybody wants you to follow what they say. And they want to be the person of all knowing and knowing all knowledge. Now, we just vessels. We just transmitting the knowledge that was given to us, and we just guided by the Most High. That's all we doing, man. So I want to commend the brother and give all praise to the Most High for the presentation we got today. And we definitely going to be looking forward to more and more of these quote unquote book reports by our brother Jashub.
All praise is due to the Most High. I also want to say Shabbat Shalom to the audience, to the observers in the audience, and to all the brothers of the family. We're gonna end the show there, man. I pray that it was insightful. I pray y'all got something from it. I pray some of y'all had y'all notes and pens out, taking notes. The video is gonna be up on the channel. So if you guys want any particular points y'all want to get highlights from, any points from, you can always go back and review the material. I will be back. I will do chapter 2 and finish up and wrap up this session on the genetics of African population by Dr. Muntaser Ibrahim, the Sudanese geneticist. The brother does excellent work and expounding on these things. And again, the marquee or the overarching theme, I should say, is that you can't judge people based off how they look. You can't judge people based off what their traits are today or what they're into today. Like, because as James brought out earlier, many blacks are Christian, many blacks are Muslim. That doesn't tell you anything about their genealogical history. All right. So subscribe to the channel. Source Gang over everything. You know how we rocking, man. We're gonna end with my brother ONE, aka Neo, 10,000 Angels by my side. Let's get it.
Taurus 45 on my side. This look like I'm balling. You can see the twinkle in my eye. Pussy bitch, you stalling. Out you living suicide. Out you living do or die. Getting high, bitch, I'm too fly. Raise the roof up to the sky. 100 proof I never lie. Tell the truth I never die. To the sky, bitch, I'm too fly. Bulletproof, big shout out to I. You don't listen to the man up in the sky, but you listen to the man up in the skies. Why you vote? You just choose which way to die. Rock the boat, shake this bitch from side to side. Make them feel just for their lives. Just like you feel just for your lives. I see that look up in your eyes. You might step, but it's on black lives. Wish you niggas realize that ain't gangster, you won't touch the one that's strength. All in all, the bitch, you might just tell them thank you. Right before we blink. Your dog names by my side. Cause these niggas scared to die. Your dog names by my side. Cause you niggas scared to die. Tears falling down my eyes. Taurus 45 on my side. This look like I'm balling. You can see the twinkle in my eye. Pussy bitch is stalling. Out you living suicide. Big shout out to I.
And with that, I'm gonna say shalom. Be on the lookout, man. We're gonna continue to feed you guys with great content here at the source. Source gang, 7 gang over everything. You know how we rocking, man. We out. Gang!